Hey guys, tonight we slip into a Greek afternoon the colour of pewter, where the rain comes down with the lazy confidence of a god who doesn't need your permission. Olive trees bead with silver drops, goats complain from under a crooked awning, and somewhere out on the muddy flats, a young god with winged sandals decides that chaos is adorable but extremely inefficient. You breathe in petrichor and sheep lanolin, and that sharp snap of lightning far away, and you keep pace with him, Hermes, patron saint of clever fixes and suspiciously persuasive receipts, as he scans a sky that can't make up its mind. You probably won't survive this. By which I mean you probably won't survive staying awake through a whole rainy afternoon audit of hooves, bells and slippery numbers, because the rhythm of it is going to rock you like a cradle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing the little constellation we make together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a cart path pocked with puddles that mirror low clouds. The mud has opinions. It clings to your sandals with the tenacity of a toddler and the judgment of a philosopher. Hermes walks ahead, bare calves freckled with rain, hat brim tipped, staff tapping a gentle metronome against stones. He's already counting without writing, eyes flicking over hoofprints, broken reeds, a tuft of tawny hair snagged on a thorn. Numbers, he murmurs, like he's greeting old friends who sometimes borrow money and forget to return it. The air tastes like olive leaf and damp wool. From the slope above, a chorus of cattle lets out a bored, basso complaint. You look up to see them bunched under a lone plane tree, brown backs glistening, tails swishing in patient semaphore. It's a respectable herd, and the owner, let's call him a certain sunlit deity with a golden aesthetic, would prefer the total this evening to match the total this morning. That, Hermes says, is the problem. He gestures at the horizon, where fresh ruts vanish into reeds. Memory is a cracked cup in the rain. You pour, and still it leaks. He stops at a flat slate embedded in the track and rubs it clean with the heel of his hand. Rain glosses the surface into a mirror where your face, slightly damp, slightly skeptical, peers back. We need order, he says, drawing his fingertip across the wet stone. Not just a head count yelled over thunder. Columns. The word feels strange and modern in your mouth, like tasting olive oil for the first time after years of butter. Columns. Not the marble kind, though Zeus knows there are plenty of those, but slender lanes for thoughts to stand in. A distant flash rolls across the fields. Thunder follows, softened by hills, as if the world itself turns in its sleep. Hermes sketches lines, 3 neat lanes, then another set, equal and parallel. Births, he says, marking a small crescent. Losses, a tiny X. Trades, a double slash like crossed reeds. You nod, rain creeping down your collar. The symbols are humble, almost shy, yet they tug the world toward clarity. Joke number 1 slips in with a grin. It figures that the god of thieves invents bookkeeping. No one appreciates strong locks like someone who has already picked a few. Mainstream historical fact, laid down without the toga fuss. In classical Greece, counting often meant pebbles. Psephoi moved on a board called an abax, a plain surface dusted with sand or scribed with lines. You imagine the abax here, this slate filling in, the rain itself providing the sheen. Hermes strokes lanes the way you might groom a horse, patient, rhythmic, calming. He lifts a handful of gravel from the path and lets the pieces clatter into his palm. Cows are stubborn, he says, but numbers will walk if we give them a road. You watch him place 3 small stones in the first lane, 2 in the second, and 1 in the third. Calves born since last night, he says, a small smile at the memory of wobbly legs and milk-wet noses. Deaths, he adds, soft a 1 old cow who slipped by the ford when the bank gave way. Trades, he finishes, raising an eyebrow at your expression. Yes, even in a storm, someone in a short cloak meets someone with a polished scale, and 2 animals change allegiance for a clink of silver and a promise that the buyer isn't a complete fool. He nudges a pebble with his thumb, and the single movement both records and consoles. The quirky tidbit arrives with a wink. The same pebbles Greeks used to count were cousins to the ones jurors dropped for verdicts. In Athens, you could literally vote with a stone, which means a good accountant could also be, in theory, a very decisive citizen. No wonder Hermes looks pleased with himself. He's turning a cow pasture into a low-stakes courtroom where each hoofprint gets its day. A wind shifts, combing the grass, and the herd's bells answer in scattered notes. Hermes cocks his head as if listening for rhythm in their clatter. "If you mark the world," he says, "the world marks back." He motions you closer and draws a tiny hoof sign beside the pebbles. "This one wanders," he says, adding a dot. "This one mothers." Another dot. "This one limps." The ledger is becoming a story. Not just counts, but meanings. The tender, petty gossip of a living system. Joke number 2. You realize this is basically ancient Greek spreadsheets, except the autosave is thunder, and you can't email the file to Apollo. You step away to squint into the reed beds. The path that slopes toward the river is slashed with backward hoofprints, the old trick. Hermes hums, amused at himself. And you feel that tug of dual loyalties. Who can resist a bit of mischief when the moral is bound to end in a reconciliation song? He taps the slate again. Memory can be charmed, but a mark resists charm. The rain steadies, the way a crowd hushes when a performer lifts a hand. Historians still argue whether early Greek herders knotted cords as memory aids, or mainly trusted pebbles and scratched boards. You say out loud, testing the sentence in the weather. Hermes shrugs, non-committal, as if to say, whatever works, works. He reaches into a pouch and pulls out a length of damp cord, ties a fat knot, then a slender one, then tugs them both tight. The knots bump against your wrist, tangible logic, but when he sets them beside the slate, the pebbles win. They're faster, clearer, and harder to reinterpret when a certain golden lyre enthusiast asks awkward questions. The storm's voice lowers from lecture to lullaby. You track the herd with your eyes, counting automatically now. 1, 2, 3, pause. Because the fourth cow is actually 2 calves nested into their mother's shadow. Your lips curve. See, this is why shouting numbers in the rain is a fool's errand. You place 2 new stones in the first lane. Hermes nods. The board the abacks in spirit begins to gleam with the logic of a kitchen scale and the tidiness of a well-made sandal. He draws 1 more symbol, a little eye with a lash. Seen. That mark, he says, tells the future you that the past you wasn't guessing. Joke number 3 leans in. If only you could stamp seen on your to-do list and have it do itself. Hermes smirks, he knows that trick too, but charges extra. A raven flaps down to the plane tree and shakes itself like a wet broom. The bird regards your board with unfair intelligence. You stand back and watch the columns hold. Births, losses, trades. The rain writes its own ledger across the plain silver lines, gentle figures, soft arithmetic that keeps the gods honest. And you, strangely, calmer than you were 10 minutes ago. Counting is a lullaby. Order is a wool blanket drying by the hearth. You glance at Hermes. He balances the staff on 1 finger, as if testing gravity's bookkeeping. There, he says. Now we know what the storm knows. You breathe out the last of your city air, the last of your hurry, and listen to the bells, the water, the easy tap of his staff. The afternoon no longer needs to decide on sun or rain. Balanced columns can hold both. The rain leans in, a patient scribe shading each reed with graphite grey, and you follow Hermes down the cart track until the path forks like a question you can answer with mud. He crouches, flicks water off his hat brim, and points. There they are. Hoofprints impress so cleanly the edges look chiseled, only they face the wrong way. Every step prints a story that says the herd walked into the hills, not out of them, which would be persuasive if you hadn't just heard those low, guilty bell notes drifting from the river flats. You angle your head, trying to read the lie. Hermes grins like a tutor, whose lesson plan includes a prank. You kneel beside him. The mud is cool, fine as ground olives. Each cloven mark is crisp at the heel and soft at the front. A tidy forgery. And you can almost see the trick happen in real time. A godling barely past his first lullaby turns cattle, presses their hooves to step backward, and smears the truth with a swirl of cleverness. He's done extra credit. 2 bundles of brush dragged to brush away the scuffle, and a few sandal prints that look suspiciously like they belong to someone old enough to know better. Hermes runs a finger along the print's edge. You can charm eyes, he says, but mud remembers. A bell thuds, far off. You rise and scan the slope. The herd's path doubles back through reeds, where the ground goes spongy and thick. Along one bend you catch a faint, quick line as if something thin and hard scratched sideways. Hermes hums, then shows you a set of marks like a child's music. Slanted little grooves where a lightweight drag, a lyre frame, a split reed, skimmed along. Joke number 1. Only Hermes would turn a crime scene into a stationery aisle, complete with accessories. You can just imagine the future exhibit. Artifacts of the theft. Brush, cord, prototype invoice. It was not Paul to the retail fee. Mainstream historical fact drifts in with the rain. The Homeric hymn to Hermes, a poem from archaic Greece, actually tells the story of this very theft baby Hermes rustling Apollo's cattle on the day he's born, then inventing the lyre to sweet-talk his way out of consequences. You picture a chorus, cloaks dark with mist, reciting lines while listeners nod the way you do when family gossip is both scandalous and inevitable. The hymn's details feel field-tested here. Reversed hooves, smooth talk, and the clutch of someone counting what shouldn't be missing. You walk the edge of the reed bed, the water whispering secrets against your ankles. Hermes stops at a tuft of tawny hair snagged on a thorn and tucks it into the ledger shingle under scene, your new favourite mark. The column calms you in ways that don't fully make sense, like claiming a seat by the hearth after a day that tried to be bigger than you. Births, losses, trades, and now, taken. He sketches a tidy little spiral, you both agree will mean absconded by parties divine and non-divine. Joke number 2 sidles up. If only modern spreadsheets offered a divine mischief checkbox, half your tax questions would resolve themselves. Back along the bend, you spot the faint crescent of a human heel. Not Hermes, this foot is broader, the angle heavier. Maybe a mortal herdsman, maybe a passerby who didn't know he'd just wandered into a myth. The print is already slumping in the rain, returning to undifferentiated soup, and you feel a little protective pang. In a world of gods, mortals deserve to leave a few clear footprints. You dab a dot beside your spiral, a meta mark. Witnessed. Hermes nods, satisfied. Our future selves will thank us, he says, as if the future leaves tips. You climb a low rise and blink through rain-threaded air at the valley's long S, where the river idles between willows. The cattle gather there, less hiding than sulking, their hides slick like varnished wood. A pair of egrets pick their toes between the hooves, bold as auditors. You count without meaning to 10, 15, 20, then pause, because two shadows fuse and unfuse like a card trick, and the number in your head clicks over. The urge to tally what's gone versus what remains tugs at you like the old desire to put books square on a shelf. You pull a pebble from your pouch and slide it into the column for recovered, in sight, which Hermes just invented, because sometimes certainty deserves a little ceremony. Quirky tidbit for your inner trivia goblin. Some old herders in the Mediterranean tuned the bells on different cows so each animal had a note, and a skilled ear could hear which part of the herd was wandering just by the cord in the air. You tilt your head now, listening. The cluster by the willows hums a low third. A straggler upfield adds a bright fifth. It's accidental harmony, a wet meadow choir, and somewhere in the mesh you detect absence, 2 notes missing, 2 animals yet unaccounted for. You slide 2 pebbles into taken and feel the ledger steady your chest. Hermes circles toward the river like a hawk, losing altitude. You shadow him, ankles splashed, eyes on the ground. The reversed hooves vanish where the bank softens. The next marks are faint, mostly smears and a single exclamation of mud, where a cow protested the indignity of mystery. He crouches and fishes up a braided tail switch dark with damp. He twirls it, amused. He dressed them, he says, probably with herb paste to stiffen the hair and hide the brushwork. Historians still argue whether such disguises ever occurred in real herding, or whether the hymn just glorifies impossible trickery. You murmur, happy to drop the phrase like a pebble plunking true into a jar. Hermes shrugs. Not committing either way, the patron of travellers leaves even truth a few roads to choose. A black dog watches from a hummock, ears pricked, investing your investigation with the gravitas of canine oversight. Hermes whistles 2 notes. The dog's head tilts, registering you both as friendly but suspicious. Joke number 3. Somewhere, a rural gossip will later report that a strange pair, one in winged sandals, one carrying a portable spreadsheet, spent the afternoon whispering to puddles. The mud takes statements without prejudice. Clouds thin at the edges, smearing white into grey. The rain softens to a fine drift that paints everything in a single forgiving colour. You and Hermes begin the gentle work of subtraction. Starting count. The morning herd under the plane tree 48. Births since 3. Losses 1 at the ford. Trades 2. You murmur numbers like beads between finger and thumb. The taken spiral holds at 2. The recovered in sight gains and holds at 46. Somewhere in reeds or myth, Two soft noses breathe air that isn't yours to count yet. Mainstream fact does another lap. Delphi, Apollo's famous sanctuary, handled offerings with meticulous records. Priests and treasurers logged dedications, weights, and values on stone and metal. In a world that could sing, they still loved a good column. The thought comforts you. Your wet ledger isn't an outlier. It's kin to the bright inscriptions where humans told time and God alike, "This is what we gave. This is what we kept." You and Hermes close the arc toward the herd. The animals watch with that slow, superior calm of creatures who know grass will happen whether or not you finish your algorithm. Close up, their differentness returns. A white blaze here, a tournier there. One cow with a blaze shaped like Crete on a map, another with a tail that hums like a loose lyre string when she flicks it. You mark a little loop beside each one you can name, a personal shorthand that says, not just a number. The page on your shingle, your rain darker backs, doesn't clutter. It clarifies. The reeds give up a new truth. A loop of cord knotted at even intervals, damp and smelling faintly of fennel. You thumb the knots, feel the memory bites. It's tempting to assign each knot a cow, each space a story. The rain makes poets of accountants. You lay it across the ledger and feel the neat compatibility. If the cord dries and shrinks, the pebble marks stay the same. If the pebbles slide, the knots still tug what's true. Systems like to travel in pairs. Somewhere above, a swallow folds the sky with a single stroke. The dog sighs, belonging to nobody but the afternoon. You look again at the print that started all this. A backward step, pretending to be forward, and then at your columns, which have no need to pretend. "He'll come," Hermes says softly, meaning Apollo, meaning the negotiation to come, meaning music laid across arithmetic like sunlight over water. You drag one finger down your spiral and resolve that, when the bright one arrives, you'll have something better than excuses. You'll have numbers that hold even when a god smiles. The cattle shift, bells chiming that humid minor third. You feel the urge to yawn, not from boredom but from the body's agreement with the rain's tempo. Even your breath wants to cue politely in the column labelled steady. The bank gives a little purr as water slips past it. Reeds nod as if they're hearing the joke you almost made and decided to save for later. You tap the shingle once, the way a chef taps a good knife, part superstition, part gratitude. The afternoon's messy story now has a spine. You slog into the low pasture where puddles collect like abandoned mirrors, each one copying the sky with a slightly worse attitude. Your sandals make the kind of noise that promises you will smell like a marsh for the rest of the day, and the herd stretches out in a lazy comma across the slope. Counting by voice seems possible for exactly 3 seconds, and then a calf slips behind its mother. Another cow sidesteps to scratch her shoulder against a reed, and the comma turns into an unreadable scribble. You try the oldest method, point and shout, and immediately lose your place somewhere between 23 and are we counting that red one twice because her shadow looks like a second cow? Hermes watches, amused, as if he's assigned you a problem set called Why Memory Fails When It's Damp. You draw a breath and start again, louder this time. The cattle glance over with tolerant, librarian energy, as if to say you can whisper. They were going to ignore you anyway. Your voice staggers when 2 bells overlap, when ripples fold a reflection into a trickster double, when the dog, your volunteer auditor, decides to stand on the precise line you're using as a mental cursor. Head counts slip, Hermes says, stepping beside you with an umbrella that is just his hat brim and a good mood. Mine's fog, rain makes twins. He doesn't sound scolding. It's a diagnosis delivered with the tone of a lullaby. He nudges you toward a drier hummock and squats so your eyes meet the herd level, not from above but from among. Try it sideways, he says. Break the moving loaf into slices. He plucks a twig and scores 3 shallow furrows in the mud. Left, middle, right. You track 3 small streams instead of 1 flood. You try it, and something in your chest unwinds. The left stream stabilizes at 15, the middle at 16, the right at 15, and although it takes a moment to negotiate a calf performing interpretive dance between categories, the totals hold long enough for your hand to get them onto the rain-dark shingle. Seen, you add, drawing the tiny eye you and Hermes invented. Your breath evens out like a boat settling on its line. Mainstream historical fact floats up like a reed raft. Greeks used wax tablets, wooden frames filled with dark wax to jot and erase, a stylus cutting and smoothing, lists dissolving with a warm thumb and beginning again. You picture a shepherd with a pocket tablet, the stylus tucked behind an ear. In a storm, your slate shingle is doing the same job. Only the eraser is the heel of your hand and the wax is whatever the sky decides to donate. You run a finger across a column, and the rain glosses the mark smooth before you rewrite it. A satisfying, rainy little reset. But memory bristles. As soon as you blink, a cow over there becomes, you swear, a cow over here, and the numbers try a prison break. Hermes smiles. Then the numbers get doors. He draws a tiny loop next to 3 marks. These are mothers, he says, nodding at the cows who keep attracting extra calves like cloud magnets. We tally their households, not just their heads. He lays a few pebbles in a tight circle beside each mother's mark, a micro ledger within the ledger. Joke number 1 surfaces. Congratulations. You now manage several subsidiaries of Moo, incorporated each with a charismatic CEO and a policy on mud. You test the system. For every household, you do the mini count. Mother, calf, possible bonus calf, who insists on union membership, and any auntie with strong opinions. You write the subtotal in the margin of the shingle, cross-check against the main column, and feel a quiet stitch appear in the afternoon, a seam holding fabric at stress points. The dog yawns, which you decide is a compliment to your process improvement. A gust sends a shiver across the puddles, and the reflections break into mosaics, reminding you that sight is a negotiator, not a witness. That's why we anchor, Hermes murmurs. He lifts the cord you found in the reeds, a neat length with knots at even intervals, and wraps it around your wrist like a gentle bracelet. You move, the knots don't. He shows you how to use the cord as a carrier of provisional totals. Every time the main count hits 10, you slide a knot to the back of your hand. A dozen steps later, when you lose the thread because 2 calves swap places like magicians, you check your skin, 1 knot carried, 7 on the board, and the story returns without drama. Quirky tidbit drifts in like a feather caught on rain. Some shepherds in the Mediterranean named not just animals but bells, claiming certain bell voices had personalities: Old Tinny, Fishbone, Grandmother Copper, and could be counted by ear alone on fog-thick mornings. You listen now, eyes half closed. The herd hums its mild chord. You recognize the middle group by a bell that clucks like a contented hen. You slide a pebble without looking, pleased with your ridiculous new superpower. Hermes scratches another symbol into the corner, a little droplet over 3 lines. Rain factor, he says. Numbers under this sign are subject to the weather's mischief. You grin. An actual adjustment for conditions, your first ancient footnote. Joke number 2. Somewhere an accountant will chisel see Appendix A precipitation onto a temple wall and feel 9 feet tall. The rain itself seems to approve, easing into a steady whisper that edits your thoughts into longer, calmer sentences. Historians still argue whether rural herding communities relied more on oral formulae, the set phrases and rhythms that stick in the mind, than on tokens and marks. You say, enjoying the scholarly cadence as it leaves your mouth. Maybe they sang their inventories. Hermes flicks water off his fingers like a metronome and answers with a tune so simple you could stack numbers on it. You hum along, and the left, middle, right groups click forward in time with the melody, a pastoral spreadsheet with a soundtrack. A calf stares, appreciating your experimental pop single. The counting finds a groove. You mark your taken spiral for 2, unchanged. You tip 2 pebbles into recovered in sight, unchanged. Your cord carries 1 knot at the back of your hand, and the shingle holds its columns like a patient harbour. Something odd nudges your ankle. You look down and discover the shingle has begun to feel important, almost warm. It's just friction and weather, of course. But you let the sentiment sit. The tool is part of your nervous system now, a prosthetic against forgetfulness. Mainstream fact. Second course. Attic numerals. The old Greek acrophonic system used letters to stand for units like 5, P for pente, and 10, delta for deca, stacking them to write large amounts in accounts. You picture some future version of you trading pebbles for letters, chiseling PP delta on a board to mean 2 5s and a 10, and it feels like inventing pockets. Even here, in pasture logic, the idea gleams. Symbols that compress reality so it fits in the space between breaths. You make a brief mistake, counting a tuft of tawny grass as a calf, and catch it by feel. The cord knot and your column disagree. Instead of panic, you experience the new pleasure of graceful error recovery. You erase with your thumb, which is both eraser and confession, and rewrite with a little sigh that could be gratitude. Joke number 3 steps delicately. You wish the rest of your life came with a wax layer and a reset thumb. Though to be fair, you've already discovered coffee. The rain changes key, higher and thinner, the way weather often does when it's got somewhere else to be. The herd lengthens, recommas itself, and you keep your trio of streams balanced. Hermes marks a protocol on the shingle margin. If a group exceeds 20 in any stream, split the stream. He traces a tiny waterfall symbol. You obey. The left bank becomes left A and left B, and suddenly the calves stop disassembling your brain. It's managerial science by mud. Your dog auditor trots off, barks once at a reed clump as if announcing he has discovered a new species of grass, then returns to sit on your foot. You accept the note in the minutes. Canine oversight enthusiastic. No material findings. A raven crosses the field and caws exactly 3 times. You count 3 without meaning to. The world keeps offering you numbers, and you keep accepting or politely declining, all in the rhythm of a slow breath. In the calmer patch of sky to the west, one pale coin of sun presses through, thin as a token slipped under a door. Shadows sharpen. The red cow you almost counted twice flicks an ear and becomes decisively 1 cow. Your totals hold. You press the seen eye one more time and watch a drop of water nestle into it like a tear that's clocked out for the day. Hermes leans his elbow lightly on your shoulder, friendly, conspiratorial. Better than shouting? He asks. You nod. Better than shouting. The system, such as it is, fits the afternoon. You will forget details later, about which puddle held which fragment of the sky, about which calf sneezed like a trumpet mute, about the exact note of the bell that sounded like a pot lid, but you will not forget the final sum, nor the shape of it, nor the marks that carry it forward into whatever conversation waits with Apollo. Numbers behave when you give them rails. Memory behaves when you give it places to sit. You look back down the track, past the plane tree where the day began, toward the slate set in the mud and the backward hoofprints that tried to tell a story to your eyes. They nearly succeeded, you think, but you brought your hands. You brought lanes and knots, marks and jokes, a tiny symbol for weather, and a polite method for being wrong and then right again. The rain thins to the softest thread, and you can almost hear it snap. You ease your weight off the soggy hummock and follow Hermes to a stand of trees, where the bark runs in long, patient ridges like lines, already waiting for meaning. The rain dwindles to a mist that doesn't so much fall as hover, as if the air is undecided about its hobbies. Hermes pats a tree trunk the way a bookbinder greets leather, then slips a small bone stylus from his pouch. Paper, he says, with theatrical gravity, but angry. You smile because it's true. Bark is what writing looks like before it agrees to be easy. He chooses a rippled plane where the ridges are close and parallel, then reads with his fingertip, counting natural lines the way you might count breaths to settle a fast mind. Scratch here, he murmurs, and the stylus whispers against the bark, leaving a pale, clean incision that won't wash away like a number drawn in wet dust. You draw a tiny seen eye at the top, for luck and continuity, and then make neat hatch marks below in clusters of 5, crossing the 4th with a diagonal like a shepherd tally. The tree accepts each mark, as if it has been waiting all afternoon to be useful. He has you test 3 media at once. Pebbles on the shingle, knots in the cord around your wrist, scratches on bark. Numbers should have more than 1 home, he says. So when weather evicts 1, 2 others still pay rent. You translate, redundancy your favourite rainproof word. You slide pebbles for the 46, recovered in sight. Tug 1 knot to the back of your hand for every 10, and cut 4 tidy hatches, and a cross on the bark for the final sum. It's strangely satisfying to feel the same truth settle into stone, fibre, and wood, like pouring tea into 3 cups and watching each fill to the same quiet brim. Mainstream historical fact steps in with clean sandals. The Romans called tally sticks tesserae, and elsewhere notched split tallies. 1 piece given to each party were used for centuries as receipts, the matching notches verifying honesty when brought together. You and Hermes rehearse the gesture, notching a short olive twig, splitting it cleanly, each of you pocketing a half. When you marry the halves again, the ridges align, and the ledger becomes a handshake you can store. You tuck your twig half beside the taken spiral as if to say, the afternoon has witnesses now, even if one of them is vegetal. The bark keeps its own gentle rhythm under your hand. The rain might try to blur it later, and the tree might exfoliate its outer skin, but for now the lines hold like the grain of a careful thought. You try the chord again, conscious of how it binds the sum to your pulse. Every 10 cows, a knot slides. Every 5, a pebble clicks. Every single, the stylus whispers a notch. You are becoming a 3-armed accountant. Except the extra arms are tools. Joke number 1. If productivity gurus ever get hold of Hermes, they will sell a course called Trimodal Tallying for Ambitious Pastoral Professionals. And you will, regretfully, sign up because the workbook smells like rain. The rain pauses as if catching its breath. The sky lightens to the colour of tin, and then to something gentler. A watered silk that remembers thunder the way old letters remember confessions. From below the plane tree, you hear a soft shuffle of hooves as the herd resettles, aligning themselves with the slope's mood. You scratch another hatch on the oak for movement noted, no net change. And the phrase feels both ridiculous and proper, exactly the kind of line an auditor loves and a poet borrows. You run a test. Hermes takes 6 pebbles from the recovered lane and stashes them behind his back, very theatrically, not stealing anything, and tells you to reconstruct the truth from cord and bark alone. The cord says you're short half a knot 5. The bark says you need 1 more hatch. You correct the pebbles without peeking at the herd, a confidence trick that pleases both of you far more than it should. Joke number 2. Please consult your bark before accusing a god. Historians still argue whether the earliest Greek markings for accounts were personal improvisations or whether there existed shared symbol sets among regions. You say, savouring the phrase like a slow olive. Hermes answers by inventing a symbol on the spot, a tiny loop with 2 dots for animals out of sight but likely within earshot. He draws it next to your recovered column and hums the low chord you learn to hear in the bells. Standardization, you think, might just be a fancy word for the symbols that survive travel. He presses your hand to the plane tree bark and closes your fingers around the stylus. Mark as if the future is cold and needs this fire, he says. You cut the 5th stroke with care. The sound is crisp, a little dry laugh from the wood. You feel a flicker of gratitude to the nameless ancestor who first tried this and found the world resisted just enough to give back a readable line. Mainstream fact curls back with a nice, precise flourish. Greek agoranomoi market overseers kept measures and weights standardized, their official sets stored in sanctuaries. Inscriptions survive, listing penalties for cheating with scales. You imagine tucking your cord and notched twig beside a public set of weights, so anyone could check a count the way they check a measure of barley. If Apollo demands audit, you'll not only have music to offer, you'll have calibration. The dog supervises from a stump, head tilted, eyes performing that serious dog algebra that decides whether a squirrel is theoretical or actual. He watches you notch a smaller stick and chuffs as if endorsing the controls. You add a footnote to your shingle, 1 droplet and 3 short lines, meaning reviewed by canine. Joke number 3. Every system improves with a dog, a nap, or both. The wind comes from the sea now, salt-tinged and a touch warmer. The wet smell of bark deepens, oud and rain, the olfactory version of low strings. You feel the day find its cadence, no longer sprinting to catch mischief, just tidying, reconciling, teaching your knuckles and wrists the new choreography. Pebble, knot, scratch, pebble, knot, scratch. The motions plait into a slow braid of certainty. You remember the backward hoof prints, the decoy reed drags, the brush that smudged the truth. You remember too the taken spiral still at 2, and the way you promised to meet brightness with columns. On the bark, you add a small spare line that you and Hermes agree to call grace note, counts that acknowledge confusion without letting it rule. It's a way to carry doubt without giving it the ledger. Quirky tidbit returns with another shine. Some beekeepers, it's said, use tally cuts on hive boxes to track harvests by season, reading honey the way you read cattle wax archives, humming with arithmetic. You look toward a far hedge, where bees might be sheltering, and feel a kinship with anything that stores summer as numbers and sweetness. Here, Hermes says, flipping the cord so the knots face inward. You count by touch now, your fingers walking knot to knot like pilgrims along milestones. He takes the shingle, brushes a wet sleeve over it to clear the old sums, and you recite while he repaints the columns from your hands, and the bark no peeking at the herd. Births, 3. Losses, 1. Trades, 2. Recovered, in sight, 46. Taken, 2. The numbers settle on the slate with the compliance of cattle found shade. You lean your forehead very lightly against the plane tree. The bark is cool, faintly abrasive, not unfriendly. The groove you cut for scene has a tiny pool of water in it, silver as a fish scale. You watch it tremble, then still. The day has a steady pulse again. Hermes slips the stylus behind your ear classic and twists the cord from your wrist onto his staff, where the knots nestle under his palm. 3 homes for 1 truth, he says. If Apollo brings sun, the pebbles will gleam. If he brings wind, the bark will sing. If he brings crowd, the cord will travel. You nod. Because somewhere between mud and bark, speed and patience, you've learned an indoor skill that works outdoors. How to make a number, sit and fetch like a good dog. The rain, such as it is, dissolves into a perfume of wet leaves and clean soil. The herd moves with the washed calm of animals who have forgiven the weather for being itself. You draw one last hatch, just a tiny one, more blessing than arithmetic, and let the stylus rest. The bark holds, the cord holds, the shingle holds, and you, who tried shouting, now cradle silence like it was the missing instrument all along. You and Hermes step back into open drizzle where the cart path flattens into a patch of trampled clay the colour of old amphorae. He stoops, palms the ground like a potter judging moisture, then fishes under a tuft of grass and lifts out a broad, thin shingle of slate the size of a dinner tray. Rain beads on it in close ranks. Portable calm, he says, and you can feel your shoulders approve before your mind catches up. Bark marks are grand, cords are intimate, pebbles are friendly, but a board you can carry is a promise that order can travel. He balances the shingle on his knee and rubs it clean with his forearm until the surface shines a soft gunmetal. Then no chanting, no lightning, just competence. He scribed 4 long lanes with the bone stylus, letting the tip kiss the slate so lightly the lines are more suggestion than incision. Births, he says, tapping the first, and draws your crescent symbol at the top. Losses, a small X. Trades, the crossed reeds. Straying, and here he adds a glyph that looks like a curly tail disappearing into reeds, your taken spiral, simplified for everyday use. He draws the little seen eye above them all, like a gently nosy household god. You crouch beside him, the slate across both your thighs now, and the rain patters its unobtrusive metronome. Each column gets a heading mark and space beneath for the day's story. You lay pebbles at the far edge for units, 1 line per animal, and then, because rain means you'll smudge stones if you drag your sleeve, you try tick marks with the stylus instead, 4 slants and a cross to bundle 5s. The shingle accepts both languages, tactile and scratched, happy to be bilingual. A ledger should never assume the weather is polite, Hermes says, as if the clouds might argue. He draws a margin on the right, a narrow, neat corridor for annotations, the droplet over 3 lines for rain factor, the tiny bell for verified by sound, a paw print for canine oversight, which your auditor supplies on cue by stepping on the slate and leaving a dignified mud oval. You laugh. Hermes approves. The ledger has acquired a mascot. Joke number 1, congratulations. You now run the first bovine fintech startup, complete with a logo and a very sleepy security team. Mainstream historical fact moseys in under its own umbrella. In ancient Athens, people scratched quick notes, lists, and even receipts on broken pottery ostraca because shards were everywhere and cost nothing. Ostraca ferried ordinary math through wet markets and dry days. Some still survive with names and numbers peeking out from under centuries. You imagine a herder sliding a potsherd and this shingle into the same bag, 1 for the shop, 1 for the field, 2 small breakable proofs that memory tried. The thought steadies you. So does the feel of the slate's weight. Argument against wind and forgetfulness. Hermes takes a thorn and tests a dot system, impressing tiny points into the damp surface beside the tick marks. Redundancy, you murmur, pleased at how practical the word tastes now. 2 scripts for 1 truth, 3 if you include the cord, 4 if you include the bark. The herd bumbles in the near distance, like a large sentence learning its punctuation. You ink the crescent in births with berry pulp, because you are incapable of ignoring a good flourish, and the colour glows like a tiny hearth under the drizzle. Columns, totals, and a place for stories, Hermes says, drawing a low line across the bottom to mark where sums will live. He extends a new lane at the far left and writes well, scratches the equivalent of opening count. You log the morning's 48 there. Then, movements today. Under it, you stack the births. 3, the loss at the ford, 1, the trades, 2, leftward arrow for 1 sold, rightward for 1 bought, and the strays 2, spiral in the middle to indicate in progress, as in myth still at large. When you reach for a flourish, he stops you with a gentle finger. Keep the totals clean, ship romance to the margin. You snort. Joke number 2, Somewhere, an epic poet just fainted. Historians still argue whether early Greek counting boards, the abax, had fixed grooves, or were simply dusted surfaces where lines were drawn and wiped. You say, letting the scholarly phrase stretch your breath. Hermes answers by raking the stylus in 4 very faint grooves along each column, insurance against sleeve smears, then dusting a pinch of sand across the slate so pebbles don't skitter. The board now combines both schools of thought like a well-balanced argument that secretly wants to become policy. Quirky tidbit drips in with the rain. Some shopkeepers supposedly used cuttlefish ink for make-do accounting near the sea, marking boards and rinsing them clean in a bucket at day's end. You look down at your slate and, for one irresponsible second, want a seaside ink wash to swirl your numbers into night. Instead, you draw the tiniest wave symbol at the margin and label it, with a grin, bucket option. Hermes approves the idea in principle, disapproves in practice, and flips the shingle so water runs off the corner you just decorated. The ledger, like a ship, has a bow. You test the board with live entries. A calf blunders into view from behind its mother, add 1 to births, dot the scene eye, tick the bell verified. A cow wanders, nose first, toward the river path you've already judged a bad idea. 1 to straying, spiral left open to mean not yet recovered. The dog, offended by the very notion of misadventure, persuades her back with a single, indignantly polite woof. You draw a small check beside the spiral and cap it with a tiny loop. In your legend, that means returned with assistance, snack owed. Tick marks accumulate like small, well-behaved raindrops. When you risk smearing with your sleeve, the shallow grooves save the count. When a pebble rolls, the sand hems it in. When your mind drifts to the way the reed beds look like a giant comb, the margin politely catches the daydream and files it under poetry. Later. It's absurd how soothing a rectangle can be. Joke number 3. If you could rent this board by the hour for your inbox, you would, and you would tip. Mainstream Fact returns briefly with a practical note. Greek accounts sometimes used acrophonic numerals on stone letters, standing for values carved into public inscriptions to record payments, fines, and temple inventories. You picture this portable slate as the wandering cousin of those dignified marbles, strolling the pasture in sandals while its city kin stands straight-backed in the agora. Same impulse, different shoes. Hermes draws a narrow box at the bottom right and scratches a symbol like a little lyre. Reconciliation, he says. When the bright one comes, music will update math. The box will hold the final settlement between theft and forgiveness, mischief and audit. The very existence of the box makes the afternoon feel less like a chase and more like a schedule. You label the left side, cattle accounted for, the right, harmony achieved, because you are a sucker for optimism when it is presented with columns. Test me, he says. He closes his eyes. You skim the herd, count with your left middle right method from earlier, check against your chord knot, then mark the slate as you hum the simple counting cadence he taught you. When you read the totals aloud, opening count 48, plus 3 births, minus 1 loss, minus 1 traded out, plus 1 traded in, minus 2 strays, plus 0 recoveries since last check. The math resolves into 48 again, if, and only if, the 2 strays return. The symmetry makes the rain sound like applause. You leave the reconciliation box politely blank. Historians still argue whether Greek herds ever used split tallies in the field, or if that practice was mainly urban contracts, taxes, rents. You add, hedging with scholarly caution now baked into your bloodstream. Hermes solves the debate to his satisfaction with a shrug, and another olive twig, which he splits and hands to you. If it works, someone used it, he says. The dog wags, endorsing this methodological minimalism. You add a legend in the corner, tiny symbols with their meanings, because the future you deserves a key when the present you is sleepy. Crescent for births, X for losses, crossed reeds for trades, spiral tail for straying, eye for seen, droplet for weather, bell for heard, paw for reviewed, wave for bucket option, strictly aspirational, lyre box for reconciliation. It looks like the friendliest set of hieroglyphs in a children's museum, and yet it holds the entire day. You underline the totals and feel an unreasonable swell of pride in your rainproof handwriting. Quirky tidbit. Encore. A few rural accountants read. Meticulous uncles were rumoured to rub a little oil into their boards to make water bead better and chalk cling more cleanly. You picture them stroking olive oil across a shingle the way sailors oil rigging before a squall. You glance at Hermes. He preempts your thought, drips a dot of oil from a tiny vial, and buffs the slate until the drizzle pulls itself into obedient pearls. It works. Of course it works. When you stand, the ledger comes with you like a tame shield. You and Hermes walk the edge of the herd, the board angled against the rain, your columns receiving what the afternoon gives. A bell tolls soft, a calf sneezes like a little trumpet mute. The reeds draw wet calligraphy across the river's skin. The numbers don't exactly matter, and they absolutely matter. Both truths, strolling companionably under the same lightening sky. The portable ledger earns its keep by letting both be true without fuss. At the plane tree, you prop the shingle on a root and draw a long, quiet line across the bottom today's horizon. Above it, the marks line up like a town at evening. Doors closed, windows warm. The straying column holds two open spirals, but you leave room for their return. The reconciliation box waits, a lyre sketched like a promise. You feel yourself yawn, that luxurious, non-hurried kind of yawn that belongs to weather with manners and work that found its groove. Portable calm, Hermes repeats, tucking the slate under his arm as if it weighs no more than a sentence. You nod. If the rain had a comment section, it would be full of seen, agreed, and the occasional first. The herd shifts. The world tidies itself by being witnessed. You follow, ledger against hip, numbers behaving, breath even. You tilt the slate so a film of rain slides off like a page turning itself, and Hermes taps the margin with his stylus as a conductor might rap a baton. Symbol time. The herd breathes a slow chord. The reeds applaud in hushes. Births, losses, swaps, he says. Need faces you can read at arm's length. The crescent for births already glows with berry tint. He trims it sharper, like a new moon cut from a pomegranate peel. For losses, he scratches a clean X, then softens the ends so it doesn't look like punishment. Just a fact the river insisted on. For trades, he adjusts the crossed reeds into two small arrows, facing opposite directions, one feathered, one plain, so a glance tells you which way the animal travelled, out or in. Your ledger begins to resemble a kind language, the sort you pick up by living with it rather than studying flashcards. You try them in the wild. A cow lowing in a register that suggests she's negotiating with biology draws your attention to the lee of the plane tree, where a damp miracle fumbles into the world. You breathe, count to keep your brain from trying to narrate, then add a berry-bright crescent under births with a little seen eye beside it. Two marks that tell the future you. You were here, you did not guess. The dog sits 2 respectful paces away, applying canine oversight, no barking, and earning his logo with quiet dignity. Joke number 1 floats up. If this board had a comment section, it would now display, "Welcome, tiny subscriber." You cross-check the symbols on your legend. Crescent for birth, dot the I for verified, droplet for rain factor, yes. The drizzle is still a meddler. Hermes hums your counting tune at half speed. You hum with him, because music seems to seat numbers where memory forgets to fidget. Symbols should sing a little, he says. If they have rhythm, you'll remember them even when you're busy being mortal. Alder phoned. Mainstream historical fact arrives wearing a sensible cloak. Greek potters and artisans used incised and painted marks potters' signatures. Workshop symbols to track origin and quality. Some amphorae even carry stamped seals showing capacity and inspector marks. You picture a row of jars in the agora with tidy icons assuring buyers, "This is who made me. This is how much I hold. Someone checked." Your crescent and arrows feel like cousins to those stamps, small assurances stamped onto a day. Loss insists on attention next. Down by the ford, you and Hermes find the drag slick edge, where the bank skin gave way earlier. A brown froth hangs on reeds, and a single bell lies like a punctuation mark with nothing to close. You bend, pick it up, shake it once. A thin, hollow tone. The X you make on the slate is simple, clean, not an accusation. You add a droplet to note wet footing, a paw print to record that the dog searched, and after a pause, one soft line in your margin, the grace note, because grief counts too, but gently. Your breath sets itself to longer sentences without consulting you. For trades, the day offers a brisk little theatre. A herdsman in a short, salt-stiff cloak appears with a scale hooked on his belt, and a smile that says he can be fair or entertaining. Hermes chooses fair and arranges a swap. One sturdy heifer out, one smaller but strong backed in, along with a handful of silver, the colour of overcast. You mark 2 arrows, outward feathered, inward plain, stacked in your trades lane, with a tiny reed bundle between them to mean market witness present. Joke number 2. You have now invented a pictographic emoji for "got a decent deal." And if the world doesn't reward that, it's not paying attention. Historians still argue whether rural exchanges like this ran on standardized weights at every village or on traveling sets checked seasonally by city officials. You say, almost tasting the argument in your mouth like good olive brine. Hermes, who refuses to be cornered by footnotes, produces a small weight stamped with a worn symbol, maybe a city mark, maybe a mythic brand, and sets it on the scale. The beam balances with a modest sigh. In the ledger's margin, you draw a tiny square to mean "weight inspected," because your future self needs to know why these arrows earned your confidence. Symbols want families, so Hermes gives them cousins. The crescent for births gets a tiny dot inside when the calf is nursing well. The X for losses gets a wavy underline if the cause is river, a jag if the cause is rocky step. The trade arrows get a small circle, if silver changed hands, and a vertical tick if it was barter. Only one cow for one yoke of barley later. IOU attached. The language grows by one stroke at a time, each addition tiny as a midge, each clarity larger than it looks. You realize you're smiling the way you do when a cupboard suddenly has labeled jars. Quirky tidbit pops by, wearing bells. Some ancient Mediterranean herders intentionally dyed tuft ends of tails or horn tips with saffron or ochre during festival seasons, so animals could be spotted at a distance in party traffic. You glance at your trade's arrows and add a miniature splash beside today's inward arrow, just because the new heifer came ribboned in a marigold scrap, her previous owner having a sense of flair. The ledger isn't just math. It gathers costume notes with the low-key glee of a tailor. The dog thumps down beside your foot, sighs, as if the entire discipline of symbology bores him into nap prayer, and shuts his eyes. You add a paw to the trades line anyway. Hermes laughs. Auditors nap, systems work. Joke number 3. You wish this axiom applied automatically to your inbox. Symbols prevent argument, Hermes says, then corrects himself with a raised eyebrow. Fewer arguments, better arguments. He points to the liar box labelled reconciliation and sketches the tiniest crescent within it. A placeholder for the truth music will confirm. When Apollo comes, the columns will talk and the liar will say, yes. The promise sits there without straining the board. A light in a pantry, you're glad to know is wired. Mainstream fact threads another clean stitch. From temple inventories to city tribute lists, Greek inscriptions often separated categories gold, silver, bronze, votive gifts, penalties, leases using headers and spacers to keep eyes honest. Your headers, births, losses, trades, straying, feel like pasture versions of the same design principle. A civic habit travelling on sandals. You imagine some future stonemason copying your crescent and arrows into marble while pretending not to be amused. Rain fiddles with its volume knob. You squat under the plane tree's dry edge and review the day at a glance. Crescents wink, where new life arrived. Softened X's speak quietly where luck declined. Opposed arrows make a neat little metronome of barter. Spirals for strays remain open like half-closed hands. The seen eyes blink from each line. An army of tiny witnesses too polite to intrude. Your rain factor droplets cluster like a weather report that prefers icons to lectures. It is absurd how legible the afternoon becomes when you give it a syntax. Test again, Hermes says, tone playful, eyes alert. He gestures toward the herd. Hide 3 details. See if symbols pull them out. You step away, hum the counting tune, run your left, middle, right streams, and let the ledger language do the pulling. 1 crescent for an almost missed calf tucked under shadows. A wavy underlined X on the memory of the ford. 2 trade arrows with a circle for silver and a tick for barley. When you read it back, the day nods as if you told it its own name correctly. Historians still argue whether symbol sets were inherited from workshops or spun up on the spot by practiced hands. You add, more for the satisfaction of honouring the debate than to win it. Hermes flips your stylus between fingers and settles on. Teach what helps, keep what sticks. You underline the legend, the friendly museum of marks, and feel the system click from invention to habit, which is just invention that paid rent on time. The herd shifts, and bells answer each other across the damp. You dot a bell icon beside 2 trades, because you verified the animals by sound later, then draw a microscopic loaf near a crescent, because the mother got bread as a thank you from the herdsman. A festival nicety you want to remember, not for math, but for morale. The ledger blushes slightly at the compliment. By habit, your eye returns to the straying spirals still 2. You add a tiny ear beside each to mean listening range they may be near. The dog's ear, on cue, swivels in stereo. The river mutters but does not confess. The spirals stay open. You don't mind. Symbols make patience possible because patience has something to do while it waits. The drizzle relents to a mild, luminous damp. You stand, slate against hip, cord around wrist, bark notches at your back like trees that keep your secrets longer than you need them to. The symbols glint dully in the thin light and then settle back into matte calm. Somewhere inside, a muscle you've carried tight since noon lets go, unknotting as simply as a line drawn to its end. When you and Hermes begin walking again, the ledger swings at your side like a reliable friend. A crescent, an X, opposed arrows, an open spiral, four small faces looking up from the afternoon's grammar. They don't shout, they don't panic. They simply make it easy for you to see what the rain would otherwise blur. You draw a little line under the totals your horizon, and the numbers stand like a town at evening. Doors quiet, windows warm, prepared for music or silence as required. The rain loosens its grip and decides to be atmosphere rather than policy. You and Hermes stop where the path widens into a little apron of trampled grass, a natural desk in the open. He squats, produces a straight olive switch from his pouch, how he had a perfectly straight one ready as a riddle with God as the answer, and turns it in his fingers like a flute. Columns tame memory, he says, but strangers need proof. He bears the blade of a shell-thin knife and carves a neat notch near the butt of the stick. 1, he murmurs. A second notch, a thumb's width away. 2. Then, the third a little longer. 5, he says, skipping ahead. Because 5s like to be landmarks. You see the logic already. Short bites for 1s, longer bites for 5s, a cross-cut for 10, a tiny crescent for births, a ripple cut for river loss, the opposed arrows for trade out and trade in. The staff begins to look like a winter of bird tracks, coded to someone who knows the walk. Now for trust, he says, and places the blade at the midway grain. With the patience of someone slicing cheese for a friend, he splits the stick lengthwise, the wood parting with a soft complaint. 2 halves, each carries the same pattern of bites, the same scars, the same story mirror truths wrapped in splinters. He hands you one and keeps the other, a receipt that can't lie to itself. You turn your half in your palm. The notch cities align when you press both pieces together. The paired cuts marry with a clicky exactness that delights some childish corner of your brain. You give one to the trader, Hermes says. He can't add a notch later without yours refusing the kiss. He flips his half end to end, testing joins. And if we both break or burn our halves, he adds with a shrug, perhaps the world wanted forgetfulness after all. The rain approves with a single diplomatic drop. Mainstream historical fact steps forward like a clerk with good handwriting. In the Greek world there existed the symbolon, a token broken in 2, one half kept by a host and one by a guest, pieces later matched to prove identity or rights of hospitality. Elsewhere and later, split tallies recorded loans, rents, and taxes. The matched notches reconciling accounts when halves met again. You feel the kinship in your hand, a small technology that makes promises portable. You test the staff with a real trade. The salt-cloaked herdsman returns, silver secure and grin approved by your symbols, and Hermes tallies the deal. 1 trade-out notch, 1 trade-in, a shallow bite for the difference in value you made up with coin, and a tiny bell nick to mean verified by sound. Then the split. He gives the man the left half. You retain the right. The man slides his half into a belt sheath as if it were a knife he'd earned. Joke number 1. You have just handed out the earliest loyalty card. Collect enough matching notches, and you qualify for a free, extremely hypothetical cow. The dog noses both halves, commits their smell to the deep canine archive next to mouse, suspicious, and your sandal after 3 miles. You scratch a paw icon in the ledger margin for canine review performed, which is mostly for your own joy and slightly for posterity. Hermes hums the tune again, while you press join to join, making sure the notches report the same news no matter which way you align them. They do. The wood insists on truth the same way mud insists on memory. Historians still argue whether split-tally practices sprang up independently in many places, or spread like clever weeds along trade routes. You say, savouring the phrase like a sip of warm broth. Hermes seems indifferent to provenance as long as the method works, and nobody gets stabbed over whose memory is shinier. He traces your reconciliation liar box on the slate, and sets both halves across it like strings. Numbers will sing when matched, he says, and the metaphor lands with satisfying neatness. Quirky Tidbit trots in wearing a goatish grin. There's a rumour file, under Pasture Apocrypha, that certain thrifty uncles once stored their tally halves in fence cracks, where goats could not reach them, until a famously innovative goat learned the smell of olive wood and made 50 eyes. Off with a month's receipts. You make a microscopic goat head in your margin and label it Chew Risk. Then, just to amuse yourself, press your half tally to your chest as if teaching it what not to smell like. You run through scenarios, because this is what calm looks like now. If a buyer claims he purchased 2 more heifers last moon, your half refuses to match, unless those notches exist on both. If a herder swears he returned a straying cow, the spiral tally notch for recovered must be present on your piece as well as his. If the river took one, the wavy underlined X must appear on each. If your memory wobbles, the wood refuses to wobble with it. You realize with a small exhale that you have invented an argument that doesn't raise voices. The stick either fits or it doesn't. Hermes adds refinements because craftspeople can't help themselves. He scores a tiny diagonal across the end his maker's mark, so that counterfeit halves carved later won't align perfectly without that diagonal telling on them. Then he rubs a smear of berry juice along your side and presses the pieces together. When he pulls them apart, the colour splits like a sunrise shared. Ink memory, he says, for short journeys. You put an asterisk in your legend and call it Berry Witness. Somewhere inside you, a librarian nods. Mainstream fact, practical edition. Ancient markets and temples kept official sets of weights and measures. Overseers could inspect merchants' gear, and fines awaited those who shaved a drachma or cheated a cubit. Split tallies feel like the countryside's version of the same impulse portable standards backed by joinery rather than decree. You picture a village day when a city inspector wanders through, matching tokens with a bored but honest face, goats rolling their eyes behind him. The idea makes you almost giddy, bureaucracy, but wholesome. The herdsman with the new heifer asks the obvious. What if someone carves a fresh tally half to mimic yours? Hermes answers by snapping off a sliver from your shared end and pocketing it, then pressing the halves together again to show how the join now includes a tiny missing tooth only you can supply. Salt grain, he says, a secret inside. He winks. You consider making salt grain a symbol on the board, then decide some secrets should travel by mouth, not mark. Joke number 2 arrives on schedule. You imagine a future where people line up at a window labelled Accounts Reconciled while you wait, pushing halves under a lattice, tapping feet, while a clerk presses wood to wood and frowns thoughtfully. The clerk is a dog. He stamps paws for match, sneezes for discrepancy. The queue approves these controls unanimously. The rain has wandered off to annoy other valleys. The board reads like a calm diary. Crescents for births, softened X for the Ford loss, opposed arrows with a little circle for the silver, 2 open spirals for your yet-to-return strays. Under trades, you add a tiny stick icon to remind future you that a split tally exists for this transaction, a literal take-home proof outside the ledger's pages. Hermes pockets his half with a satisfied shop-closing gesture and, for drama, places your half under the reconciliation lyre box. The dog resists the urge to sit on it. Test time, Hermes says. He covers the slate with his hat and asks you to reconstruct the transaction from the halves alone. You match wood to wood, feel the notch count under your thumb pads, and recite without looking. 1 heifer out, 1 in, coin difference paid, bell verified, weight inspected, canine oversight performed. You're absurdly pleased to be right about something the rain can no longer smudge. Historians still argue whether symbol-on-like tokens were mostly social friendship, hospitality, or whether they commonly carried economic data like ours. You say, now half for the pleasure of naming the grey areas. Hermes answers by carving another stick, quickly, but this one he breaks not lengthwise, but diagonally across the grain, an awkward fracture only those 2 pieces will ever share. Hospitality, he labels it, tucking 1 jagged triangle into your palm. For after, if you pass by again. The gesture lands in the part of your chest that counts days by kindness. Quirky tidbit, final lap. Some keepers, proud of their systems, rubbed oil into tally sticks to keep them from swelling in damp weather, then perfumed them with thyme or bay so they doubled as pocket sachets. Your half smells faintly of berry and olive and rain. You consider adding a sprig but decide you like truth to smell like wood. Joke number 3. Tiptoes in. You picture writing your name on your half in big, legible letters. Then, remember, A, you didn't bring a pen, and B, writing your own name on everything is what you do when you've lost 3 pairs of socks in a week, not when you've invented reconciliation. Instead, you carve a tiny dot, your private mark on the inside face, where only the match can see it. When you and Hermes rise, the stick rides your belt as if it always belonged there. It's light, and yet it feels like weight-bearing architecture, a joist in a small house called trust. You glance at the herd. The 2 open spirals in your straying column wait like unclosed parentheses, patient as ellipses. The herdsman touches his hat, touches his half, and walks off toward a lighter strip of sky. Proof travels with him, travels with you, and neither of you has to carry the whole story alone. The slate, the chord, the bark, and now the split tally. 4 harmonies in a pastoral chord. You touch each in turn, stone, fibre, wood, wood again, and feel the invention settle from novelty into habit. Apollo will come. There will be music. When he does, you'll have more than charm. You'll have joins that click, columns that add, cymbals that sing, and a stick that says, without raising its voice, "We agreed." You feel for the familiar bump of pebbles in your pouch, the way a chess player taps pawns for reassurance, and Hermes nudges you toward a bare crescent of shore where the river has exhaled a tongue of fine packed sand. "Field office," he says, and draws his stylus across the surface in patient strokes. 4 long grooves bloom like irrigation channels. 3 short crossbars create little bays. The board looks obvious, as soon as it exists. How did you not see a counting harbour waiting under your feet all afternoon? You kneel. Sand gives, then holds. Hermes shakes a few river-wet pebbles into your hand. Their skins are cold and satisfyingly smooth, and you slide them into the first groove. 1 pebble per cow. Every 5th pebble hops up into the second groove. A tidy promotion that keeps your brain from tripping on its shoelaces. In the margin you etch today's symbols in miniature. The crescent for births, the softened X for losses, the opposed arrows for trades, the open spiral for strays. Beside them you draw your I for seen, and the droplet that concedes the rain's editorial role. The dog watches from a dry tussock, doing advanced napping with occasional ear. You test the rhythm. Count 5, blink, slide 1 up. Count 5, breathe, slide 1 up. When the promotion groove hits 5, you bump 1 pebble further up into a third groove that stands for 25, and your mind, once a swamp of half-said numbers, turns into a neat staircase. Joke number 1. It's basically an ancient progress bar, and you feel a subliminal urge to click skip ad on the rain. Mainstream historical fact folds itself into the sand with your first tidy run. The Abax accounting board was a Greek staple. Sometimes it was a table dusted in ash or sand, sometimes a slab scored with lines, and later an actual device with grooves for pebbles, sefoy sliding, to record units, 5s, 10s, and so on. Merchants, taxmen, engineers, anyone whose day had more numbers than patience, used variations to make totals behave. You look at your little shore Abax and feel kinship with every fishmonger who ever bullied a sum into cooperating before lunch. Hermes draws a second set of grooves beside the first, a mirror board. 2 eyes, he says. 1 counts the herd, 1 counts the ledger. When they agree, you get to sit down. You hum the counting tune at a lazy tempo and move pebbles in parallel. Left-hand sand for bodies in the field, right-hand sand for marks on your slate. The moment the 2 stacks diverge, you freeze. Scan for the trick. A calf tucked into shadow. A mirrored reflection. The red cow whose shadow wants to be a second cow again. You correct. The stacks rejoin each other like friends who stepped into different doorways by mistake. And your chest loosens another notch. The river makes a deep, contented sound, like a barrel settling. Hermes laces your cord around a low root so the knots line up near your right hand, third memory lane to ride alongside the 2 sandboards. Every 10 bodies, you slide a knot. Every 25, you hop a pebble to the next groove. Every 100, well, you're not there. But he draws a little star where that story will be told. Numbers should be able to walk, he says. Not only stand. You inhale wet leaf and faint fish and realize your thoughts have synced to the Pebbles' small city traffic. Quirky tidbit arrives with a grin. Sailors, bored and methodical, sometimes scratched ad hoc abashi on deck planks with pitch or chalk to divvy shares of catch, sliding beans or shot into lines while a gull heckled the math. You picture an oarsman flicking a shell up a groove and smirking when the coxswain loses count. Your dog opens one eye, decides boating math is outside his job description, closes it again with a sigh. Historians still argue whether the earliest abaci in Greece were formal toolkits owned by officials or improvisations anyone could rake into dirt. You say, because it feels good to tuck debate into the day the way you tuck the stylus behind your ear. Hermes, allergic to either, or when both, and will do, rakes his stylus to deepen your lines, then deliberately smudges a section with his palm and redraws it better. Improvised until it isn't, he says, which is a shockingly decent definition of technology. You test the board with complications. Birth. You drop a pebble into the first groove on the left then, because you've seen with your own eyes and you like ritual. You dot a tiny eye in the sand beside it. Loss. You lift a pebble out, tap the surface in a small X where it used to be, and add a wavy underline if the cause was river. Trade out and in. You pluck one pebble from the left set and slide one into the right set's opening groove. Then mark opposed arrows between the two boards so the narrative is visible even to a passing heron. Stray. You park a pebble on the edge, just off the groove, spiral drawn around it open until you find the body it corresponds to, closed when you do. The grammar works. Sand doesn't mind if you tell the truth in pictures. Hermes raises the stakes. Count it with your ears. You close your eyes. The herd breathes, and bell notes fall like drops on a drum. In your head, left middle right groups step forward, and you flick pebbles without looking. 5, 5, 5, bump, 5, 5, 5, bump. You open your eyes and find, to your surprise and a small smugness, that your stacks match the ledger slate's numbers and your cord knot sits where it should, unoffended. Joke number 2 swirls in. You have unlocked a minor superpower that will never make you famous and will make you quietly competent forever. Mainstream fact takes another quiet lap. The root of calculation in Latin is calculus, a pebble. People once did math by moving literal stones in lines. The metaphor hardened into a word, and then into the entire grim architecture of homework you avoided. Here, before homework was invented, you are moving calculus between damp fingers and feeling the words soften back into a pleasant weight. The dog steps delicately onto the board. Audit intervention, leaving 2 clean paw prints that intersect a promotion groove. You smirk, brush the mark smooth, and add a tiny paw icon in the margin because your legend is a scrapbook now and that's fine. Hermes tries something bolder. He drags a reed to draw a fat ribbon down the middle, a river boundary. Pebbles on one side mean cows counted north of the ford, the other side south. When you tally and later check calves against mothers, you can see at a glance whether your wanderers crossed water or only mood. Historians still argue whether the Aegean region inherited counting board habits from the Near East, or invented parallel methods from similar problems. Grain, ships, cattle. You say, as if sprinkling breadcrumbs for some future scholar. Hermes shrugs, and with a magician's laziness, flicks 3 pebbles, so they land exactly where you meant them to next. Problems are cousins, he says. Cousins share tricks. Quirky tidbit returns in a bright ribbon. There's a story that certain festival accountants traced numbers in wine on sanded boards at banquets, letting figures appear, glisten, and vanish as cups emptied practical and theatrical at once. You look at your wet Shora backs. Imagine pouring a slick of watered wine across it at sunset and doing one last showy reconciliation before wiping the day clean with your palm. Hermes raises an eyebrow that says, "Do not waste wine unless your math is rude." Joke number 3 ambles in, wagging its tail. You imagine pitching Beach Abacus as a wellness retreat. Center yourself with grooves and immediately picture a brochure with a very relaxed goat. You decide to spare civilization and keep your spa to this small river bend. You ratchet the counting faster as light changes. The 2 open spirals in your straying column beg attention, so you lay out a small search puzzle in sand. For each stray, a pebble sits just outside the groove, with 3 tiny dots to the right, one for listen, one for look, one for lure back with hay. The dog, insulted that the 3rd dot exists, performs dot 2 and 3 at once. He looks and lures, and 15 slow breaths later, a familiar bell rings from the reeds. Old Tinny, the middle chords cluck. You close one spiral in sand, then on slate, then with a final tiny notch on your split tally stick. The joinery of systems makes your ribs feel like they've learned to be a xylophone for relief. With 1 stray left, you pause and run a quick reconciliation. Opening 48, plus 3 berths, minus 1 loss at the ford. Trades net 0 heads today, out and in, minus 1 stray outstanding, equals 49 bodies present if the last spiral closes. Your left and right boards agree. Your cord knot sits cocky at the back of your hand. The slate's tidy columns nod in chorus. You could do this with your eyes closed now, and you almost do, because the river has applied a lullaby filter to the world. Mainstream fact final cameo for the section notes that Greek juries voted with pebbles too, dropping stones to signal guilt or acquittal. Counting has always had stakes. A little pile of psephoi can tilt a life. Here, your stakes are gentler. Cows, coins, pride. But the pebbles feel momentous anyway. You move one last stone and, as if the world likes a good ending, a bell from the far willow shakes itself awake. The final wanderer emerges with grass in his mouth and 0 remorse in his eyes. You lift the pebble from the spiral, slide it into the unit groove, bump your promotion pebble with a pleased little flick, and draw a closed spiral on slate with a flourish you pretend is modest. Historians still argue whether the abax was more math or more memory. You say, savouring the law school cadence while your hands smooth the grooves flat for next time. Hermes answers by sweeping the board with his palm, erasing the day from sand while leaving it intact in slate, cord, bark and tally. Both, he says, and rehearsal. You nod, prying a grain from under a fingernail, feeling both clean and properly dusty. You stand, brush your knees, and tuck the pebbles back into the pouch. They click like polite applause. The dog yawns a curtain call. The river, pleased with its guest roller's spreadsheet, resumes being only a river, which is another kind of math entirely. You shoulder the slate. The sand remembers you for 2 gusts, then forgets, which is perfect. Some truths should fade in place, held elsewhere with better ink. You angle the slate against your hip and drift along the herd's edge, counting not by bodies now but by faces, which, as it turns out, are easier to trust than weather. Marks, Hermes says, tapping his stylus on the margin where your legend lives. So numbers on a board belong to the same creatures in the grass. He gestures at a sober, broad-backed cow and ties a thin thong just above her hoof, a temporary bracelet that says she's the prototype. The ledger will learn to point at her without stuttering. The dog approves this move by wagging in lowercase. He starts with sound. From a pouch like a travelling harmonium, Hermes pulls 3 small bells and lets them speak 1 deep bronze sigh, 1 nimble brass question, 1 iron peep that's all personality. You loop the mellow bell to the herd's calm centre, the bright one to a restless auntie who keeps drifting into reeds, and the peep to the new heifer who still thinks rivers are soup. The air rearranges itself around these voices. Your ear can now read the herd the way your eye reads columns. Joke number 1. You have essentially installed a notification system that moos. Mainstream historical fact trots in with good manners. The word bellwether comes from fitting a bell to a lead wether, a castrated ram, to guide a flock. The bell declares direction even when sight fails. The principle scales nicely. 1 confident sound and a lot of wool or cattle will follow. You hear it instantly. The deep bronze draws the middle group like gravity, and when she moves, the comma-shaped herd punctuates neatly without you raising a hand. You dot 2 little bell icons on the slate, where it matters, verified by sound, becomes less a flourish and more a field tool. Colours, next. Hermes dyes his thumb with mashed berry, then with a pinch of yellow earth, then with charcoal smudge. He touches 3 calves on the crown, a red dot, a yellow dash, a soot kiss, and shows you the matching marks he adds to the ledger, tiny echoes beside the crescents for births. For dusk, he says. For fog. For the moment when a shadow pretends it's a second animal. You consider a full palette, and immediately write, no festival palette creep in the margin because you know yourself. The rain agrees, barely, silvering the new dots and then standing back. Earmarks. The delicate work. Hermes kneels by a placid cow and lifts the ear's soft flag. With a sliver of reed sharpened to a tidy wedge, he snips a tiny V near the edge, then rubs a smear of thyme to sting and to bless. Left ear, he murmurs, for births, right ear for trades. Your ledger gets a micro-triangle beside the appropriate symbol. The cow flicks once, decides this is the price of membership, and returns to chewing. Joke number 2. You apologize for the inconvenience, like a barista who spelled her name wrong on the cup. She forgives you, because she can't read. Historians still argue whether early Greek herders used stable, region-wide ear notch codes, or mostly local folkways that travelled with families. You say, loving the way folkways makes your mouth move like a loom. Hermes, never a fan of committees, votes for whatever works and wasn't invented by a goat. Still, he indulges your archivist heart by sketching, in the ledger's legend, 3 standard notches with meanings you two swear to keep. V-cut near the tip for birth in our care. Square bite on the back edge for trade-in. Shallow crescent on the front rim for trade-out. The symbols sing a little even without wind. Mainstream fact, rustic edition. Roman agricultural writers like Varro and Columella describe marking animals sheep daubed with pitch or ochre to denote ownership. Leaders belled so flocks behave, dogs collared for work. Such markings made inventories match the animals they claim to represent. You scratch a tiny var in the margin as an inside joke, then cross it out because the rule today says no names, only usefulness. The method, not the citation, keeps the herd honest when Thunder tries to edit. You experiment with dyes on tails, recalling the festival trick you heard earlier. A saffron streak at the base for this one tends to stray, a charcoal ring near the tuft for this one mothers too. You double the marks in your ledger, small echoes beside spirals and crescents, and feel the day tighten like a properly laced sandal. The dog gives a skeptical sniff at the saffron, then sneezes once audit commentary. Aromatics division. Quirky tidbit ambles over in a garland. Some Mediterranean shepherds swore by smoke holding a little brazier near the flank to leave a soot print shaped by a palm stencil fast, painless, and gone in a week. Hermes demonstrates on an obliging cow. Your hand makes a leaf-shaped negative. The ledger gains a little leaf icon where her number sits. The print wafts a ghost of oak and oil. You inhale it with the same quiet satisfaction you get from labeling a jar correctly on the first try. Symbols meet bodies, Hermes says, and as you practice the round trip, you point at a mark on the slate, a crescent with a nursing dot, a bell icon, a V-notch triangle, and then find the matching life in the field without counting from left to right. It feels like reading a friend's handwriting from across a room, intimate and smug. Joke number 3. You briefly imagine a game show called Match That Moo, then decide the world already has enough strange television. You add failure modes to the legend because you are not naive. What if dye washes? Then the ear notch holds. What if the ear tears in a thicket? Then bell and ledger eye pin identity until you can remark. What if a bell falls? Then the tail stripe and your sander backs, drawn quick, anchor the sum. You sketch a tiny triangle of resilience sound, sight, cut so future. You remembers that one idea rarely walks alone. Mainstream fact does a small bow toward temples. Inventory lists for sanctuaries recorded, not just counts of animals dedicated but distinguishing, notes, colours, horns, condition, so that the offering described match the offering tethered. You glance toward your reconciliation lyre box and imagine explaining your calf with the red dot and nursing symbol, while Apollo tunes. The image is ridiculous and calming, math as music's stagehand. Historians still argue whether bells were common on mainland cattle or more typical for sheep and goats in hill country. You add, because fairness demands a hedge. Hermes shrugs and says the quiet part. The argument changes nothing about how nicely this one chimes. He flicks the mellow bell, the herd recommas, and your ear learns to trust again. You check your 2 open spirals, then remember, with a pleasant jolt, that sand and slate both show 1 left, not 2. The bell peep of the new heifer darts near the willow, and your saffron tail streak flashes like a match head. You close the final spiral with deliberate ceremony on the slate, and because your systems now cross-pollinate nick, a tiny confirmation bite on the split tally stick, where recovered lives. The wood's answer click might as well be applause. Quirky tidbit. Encore. Some herders taught a bell song to the dog, a sequence of head tilts and steps keyed to bell tones so that one human could run a count by sound, while the other stirred porridge. You test a humble version. 3 clucks from the middle bell, 1 peep from the heifer, a bronze sigh from the anchor cow. The dog performs a tidy triangle around them like a polite dancer at a village feast. Your margin accumulates a tiny paw next to a miniature musical note. Nobody but you will know what it means, which is exactly right. You lean the slate against a knee and annotate aftercare. Die refresh at dusk if rain returns. Bell straps checked, ear edges watched for snags. The legend blossoms without becoming a jungle. Hermes draws a slim box titled Identity Exceptions, where you can write one-off notes like red blaze shaped like Crete, or tail hums like a lyre string. The latter, already an in-joke from earlier. The board loves these little footnotes. They keep math human. A breeze lifts, trading petrichor for sun-warmed leaf. In that shift, you hear how the system has moved from frantic invention to gentle habit. Sound, colour, cut, slate, chord, bark, sand, abax, and split tally. Each tool knows the other's songs. When you look at the herd now, you don't just see 40-some bodies. You see sentences, the bellwether comma, the newborn semicolon, the sober period that is the old cow who dined with the Ford. The numbers remain, but they have faces, and the faces have quiet names in your margin. Some afternoon soon the bright one will arrive, all lyre and radiance, and you'll hold out this calm map. Bells that sing true, dies that stood the drizzle, earmarks that match your marks. The dog will sit like an ink blot in a legal text, indispensable and a little smug. Hermes will do what Hermes does, smile, cheat only toward clarity, and nod when the columns match the creatures. You will breathe in a way that tells your whole spine. We did not guess. We saw. We heard. We recorded. Then you'll probably make tea. You run your thumb once more across the scene eye at the top of the board, and a last drop of water settles there like agreement. The herd shifts, jingles, sighs. Your symbols shine dully and then fade back into their quiet jobs, like lanterns turned down but still warm. Identity has joined arithmetic. The names on the page now point to lives, and the lives point back without confusion. It's a small, complete circle you could wear as a ring. You hitch the slate higher on your hip, and Hermes steers you toward the road, where carts ooze past with that dignified creak that says, "I am mostly axle and opinion." Here the air smells less like rain and more like trade, wet leather, olive mash, faint garlic from a lunch that promised to be humble and succeeded. "Heads are counted," he says, tapping the legend with his stylus. "Now teach the board to speak price without catching fire." He scratches a small pan balance in the margin, 2 trays, one slightly lower. Beside it he adds a round bug-eyed owl. "Silver. Weights," he says. "And what the world swaps them for." He right-sided Getter and I. You draw a column titled Measures, with little rungs to catch units, a handspan for small, a cubit mark for long, and under that, a neat box for weight checked. Hermes sets a walnut-sized stone on the shingle, his travelling standard, and nudges the dog away from the notion that stones are edible. Then he chalks 2 miniature arrows in your trades lane that you already love, and adds small circles for silver given and little amphorae for grain promised later. Joke number 1. Congratulations. Your ledger now accepts multiple currencies, none of which are store points, which means you might actually sleep at night. Mainstream historical fact arrives in sandals with tidy straps. Athens kept official standards, weights and measures stored near the agora. Agoranomoi, market overseers, enforced them, and the city's silver tetradrachm, the owl, circulated so widely that even foreign merchants trusted its weight. You etch 3 tiny feathers beside your owl icon for the famous coin. Then, because your inner clerk is impossible to stop, a little square to mean verified against city weight. The symbol looks smug in an honest way. Hermes fishes a small bronze balance from his bag, because of course he does, and cups a drachma weight on one pan, then plops a twist of wool on the other to show how things argue before they agree. He grins at your face. Price is what silver says, while barley listens. You make a column titled Valuation Notes and give it a tiny ear. Storms move price, distance moves price. Rumour, that barefoot god, sprints ahead and moves price with no inventory to back it. You draw a little winged sandal to mark rumour and promise yourself you won't overuse it. You will absolutely overuse it. The herdsman returns with the weather-beaten patience of someone who has met afternoons before. He wants to settle a feed debt from last month, one heifer he took on credit when the river fenced him out of his pasture. Hermes places your split tally half across the lyre box. The notches sing without sound, then tilts the balance. Silver clinks in a leather purse. You mark 1 owl in the margin, circle it to show paid now, and scratch a tiny barley ear for the remainder due at harvest. The board starts to look like a well-behaved comic strip, which is how you know it's working. Quirky tidbit wanders in with a wink. Some merchants, not trusting anybody's zeal, bitcoins to test softness, pure silver dents differently than base metal nonsense, and a few show-offs flicked good coins on stone to hear the ring. You try a tentative tap. The coin sings a light, quick note. You add a music mark beside your owl and decide it means sound test passed. a ridiculous flourish that will save you from at least one ridiculous argument. Historians still argue whether cattle retained real pricing power into the classical period, or whether cow had already slipped into metaphor for value by the time city silver took the lead. You say, tasting the hedge like olive brine. Hermes declines the lecture with a shrug and a new symbol. A tiny, boxy ox skull. Cow value benchmark. On days when barter wins, you can say, this equals half a cow, and everyone's mind settles like silt. Prices don't hold still. A cart arrives bearing salt, the honest, cratered kind, and two boys with shoulders like questions. Salt is dear when inland, cheaper by the sea. Today the river is fat and friendly, so transport is kind, and the price leans down. You mark a droplet next to your owl, not rain factor, but river kind to freight. The boys want a calf next month, salt today, and you engineer a trade shaped like a hinge. 3 amphorae of barley IOU, salt now, a calf later at a discount, because Hermes hates late fees more than he loves drama. The opposed arrows purr into place. Your amphora icons form a tidy trio. You put a little hinge mark between them because it delights you and causes harm to nobody. Mainstream fact. Hawk's eye version. Greek polis used different weight systems. Aeginetan, Euboic, Attic, and merchants were bilingual in mass. When cities argued with each other, as a hobby, silver standards sometimes did the diplomacy. You add a tiny letter to your owl alpha for Attic so that future, you won't forget which grammar your math spoke today. You also scratch a microscopic turtle beside a theoretical Aeginetan coin because Aegina loved a good sea creature on its money, and your legend enjoys mascots. Hermes draws 3 small columns at the bottom labelled Today's Drift, Grain, Salt, Labour, each with a scale icon and a winged sandal if rumour meddled. Grain tilts a hair up because a hail squall bruised the far field. Salt drops a hair river kindness. Labour floats, changeless, because rain made everyone slow together. You run totals through your sandbacks nearby for the pleasure of moving pebbles, then copy clean sums to slate, chord knot confirming with a polite thump against your wrist. Joke number 2, pads in. You imagine publishing a weekly Moo letter market updates with bell icons and weather droplet emojis, and immediately picture 3 subscribers, all cows, writing in, Plels, cover Clover Futures. You keep this to yourself because Hermes is already hard enough to live with when he's right. The herdsman and Hermes haggle like 2 men who both like each other in arithmetic. Hermes sets a barley amphora on the left pan. The herdsman puts 2 owl coins and 1 little obol on the right. You nudge a pebble up a groove. The balance breathes once and settles like a cat in a bowl. Ledger. 2 owls circled. Paid. 1 amphora icon with a dot due at harvest. 1 ox skull half. Benchmark stated aloud so everyone sleeps. You draw a just visible smile in the margin, then rub it away because aesthetics. Quirky tidbit returns wearing festival ribbons. Some villages set lucky days when buying a cow dictated a tiny tithe at Hermes' roadside herm, just a coin flicked at the statue's base for traveller's luck. You scratch a little square pillar in your margin and drop a dot at its foot. You call it luck fee, voluntary, and the herdsman, who knows a good narrative when he hears one, flicks a sliver that pings like approval. Historians still argue whether coinage sped everyday transactions for country folk or mostly beautified city walls, while the countryside kept bartering with barley, cheese, and favours. You say, though the afternoon itself seems to have an opinion. Mixed. You hold the tally half that proves a trade, the coin that passes sound and weight, the promise of grain that will come when seeds remember the plan. The ledger doesn't care which story wins. It cares that the symbols align. Mainstream fact with a civic grin. Some Athenian decrees carved on stone listed rents of sacred lands, names, amounts, and term lengths public accounting as architecture. You underline your valuation notes header and feel a silly kinship with people who chiseled neat rows to tell a city what it owned. Your board is just wetter and more opinionated. Hermes points at your today's drift box and adds a new icon, a tiny mask. Festival, he says. Prices grow feathers near music. You draw 2 masks next to salt and labour because a nearby village will be singing by evening and everyone will want bread and rest. The board nods. You swear you can feel nodding. Joke number 3. You write, do not price while hungry in a corner, then take it very seriously, producing a heel of bread to ensure your policy compliance. The dog enforces the sop by staring until you share. Audit complete. A breeze combs the reeds. Bells answer with practiced vowels. You run one reconciliation sweep. Opening count, births, loss at the ford, trades netted, strays all closed, cattle accounted for equals bodies in grass. In the lyre box, you finally let yourself scratch a tiny string. Just one, because you can smell the sun somewhere past the cloud, and that smells like an audit that ends in music. Owl icons gleam dully. Amphorae wait politely. The winged sandal for rumour has no new orders. You lift the balance to your eye and watch the beam stand level. For once, the world does not argue. Numbers sit, prices sit. Even rumour folds its wings for a minute. You dot the seen eye at the top of the board and breathe out, long and level. A line across the bottom of the day. You feel the weather tilt from grey arithmetic toward gold music. The way a room changes when someone lights a single lamp. The herd compresses into a readable paragraph. Bells hush to vowels. Even the reeds behave. Hermes bites back a smile that says he has been waiting for the audit's favourite guest. Sun in human form, lyre in hand. Posture that implies he has never once misplaced anything except, possibly, his patience. The road grows brighter, not by degrees, but by decision. Apollo arrives the way a conclusion does. Obvious once it's here. You stand slightly behind your portable ledger, which suddenly looks both humble and proud, like a good notebook at a great lecture. The reconciliation lyre box you drew hours ago waits like a stage cleared and swept. Hermes, who has done the day's messy work with pebbles, knots, bark, sand, bells, dye, and notch sticks, rests his hand on your shoulder and nods you forward. You don't bow. You balance slate on hip, cord on wrist, tally half at belt. Numbers breathe quietly under your palm. Apollo's eyes flick to the herd, then to the board, then back to Hermes with that, "I know what you did last myth. Look, siblings perfect." "Proof," he says, not unkindly. Hermes gestures to you. "Show him." You begin with the leftmost column, voice slow enough for the rain that still keeps its own private minutes. Births. Crescents marked, nursing dots set, matched to calves with berry crowns, and the mother households you ring-fenced earlier. Losses. 1X. Wavy underlined for river. Paw print for canine search. Grace note because grief counts without demanding a speech. Trades. Opposed arrows out and encircled owl for silver. Amphora for harvest IOU. Tiny square for weight inspected. Your ox skull benchmark muttering half a cow where that helps a tired brain at dusk. Strays. Both spirals closed. One with ear icon for herd. One with bell icon for guided home by patience and snacks. Above all, the seen eyes. Dotted when you watched, undotted when you confirmed by sound. Joke number 1. Tiptoes in, because you can't help yourself. If spreadsheets had a purr, this one would be motorboating like a contented cat. Apollo's mouth doesn't commit to a smile, but it doesn't not commit either. Mainstream historical fact steps onto the stage in sandals and a shell. The Homeric hymn to Hermes tells that the baby trickster, on his very first day, stole Apollo's cattle, and then fashioned a lyre from a tortoise shell and cow gut strings. The gift of that instrument soothed Apollo's anger and sealed their exchange cattle for music, mischief for concord. You don't cite. You gesture, palm open, to the small lyre you've sketched in the box, and to the string you penciled when the strays finally returned. Apollo's fingers, even empty, hold themselves like they've been tuning through eternity. He plucks the air, no instrument yet. The gesture itself has sound, and Hermes, unbothered by omens, slides your split tally half into view. The notches line up against Apollo's memory, and you see it happen. The glance that goes from clouded to clear when receipts match recollection. Hermes flips the stick. The salt-grain secret tooth locks with its mate. The berry witness your teacher pressed earlier shows a pale, honest seam. Your dog noses the join and issues a single approval sniff. Apollo, to his credit, recognizes a good auditor when he sees one. Historians still argue whether the hymn preserves ritual memory, an etiology for why Hermes owns commerce and Apollo music, or whether it's primarily a witty story that later priests organized into theology. You murmur, offering the debate the way you offered pebbles to sand carefully, usefully, without insisting it solve anything today. Apollo tilts his head, accepting the footnote as a garnish, not a meal. He gestures now, the actual lyre appears. Tortoise back glinting like wet shell, arms curling like 2 patient questions. He lifts it. The herd forgets to chew for 3 heartbeats. Hermes nods toward your box. Let it sing. You draw a second faint string next to the first nothing fancy. Just a line that says sound confirmed what scratches promised. Apollo touches a phrase that smells like honey crossing warm bread. It's simple, as counting has been simple all afternoon. 5, 5, 5, lift. 5, 5, 5, lift. Your Sanderback's tune reappears in music. The bells answer with their comfortable thirds and fifths. Your columns settle like chairs when everyone finally sits at the same table. Quirky tidbit drifts in with charm rather than certainty. Some old players claim tortoiseshell lyres, lighter and sweeter, favoured tender airs at night, while wood-bodied kitharas carried days louder business contests, paeans, proclamations. Whether or not that's uniformly true, this one is night's instrument, and your numbers are night's numbers, soft-edged, checked, patient. You feel, absurdly, like you're conducting a duet, arithmetic and lullaby trading verses. Joke number 2. For one perilous second you imagine a sticker on the back of the lyre. Owed it, inspected by #23, and you set the thought down before lightning finds it funny. Apollo hears the loss at the ford without you saying it. It lives in a minor note he lets hang, then resolves in a way that isn't denial, just acceptance, given a place to sleep. He slides the melody across your trade arrows. The inward one glows a hair brighter, as if future milk already weighs in the scale. He lands on the closed spirals with a flourish small enough to be polite. Music is doing what math did, escorting desire to reality without bruise. Now the count, Hermes whispers, and you do your left middle right streams one last time, humming the inventory tune he taught you. Hermes sets his half tally across yours and smiles one of those small, sideways smiles that pays in friendship instead of coins. Somewhere across the pasture, a raven, never out of work, says one syllable that could be commentary or applause. To close the loop without squeezing it, you add tiny confirmations where they make sense. A bell icon by the last spiral, doubled to mean heard, then guided. A paw by the valuation notes that recorded today's kind river freight. A droplet over 3 lines, rain factor fading because the sun finally picks this side of the valley. An almost invisible line, your quiet horizon, across the board's bottom edge. Above it, columns stand like doorways lit from within. Apollo's last phrase is the ABAC's tune again. 5, 5, 5. Lift only now, it carries a sweet overtone your skin hears. The herd breathes it. You do too. Hermes caps his stylus and, with theatrical formality, flips the slate's leather strap over your shoulder. Account closed, he murmurs, until morning invents new cows. The dog signs off with a yawn so long it has punctuation. The bright one looks at your work, not like a teacher, but like a colleague, then at Hermes with a brother's weary affection that says, "Don't do that again." And I admit it was elegant. He walks toward the thinner part of the cloud and takes some daylight with him. The board, unglamorous and brilliant, holds what the music blessed. The evening learns to stand on it. You stroke the seen eye once, to tell the day it was witnessed. Then you breathe, longer than usual, and let the line you've drawn along the bottom of the board become the line your body follows into rest. The herd settles. Reeds write their soft script on the slow water. Somewhere, a coin rings faintly in a purse and decides to be quiet. Road damp and newly convinced of sunlight, you and Hermes drift from pasture edge to the track proper where stones shoulder up like old teeth. The herd strings along behind in a polite ellipsis, bells speaking vowels to the afternoon. Columns tame cows, Hermes says, thumbing the strap of your slate, but roads demand numbers with edges. Ahead, a squat pillar rises, where 2 lanes meet, a square shaft of marble with a calm, bearded face carved near the top and a neat, weather-bright inscription running down its belly. Laurel hangs from a nail. Oil darkens the crown where many palms have greeted it. Hermes taps his staff twice. Hello, cousin, because of course the first boundary marker on the lane is a Herm. You circle the pillar the way you would a dependable friend at a crowded party. The face is not fierce. It is supervisory. Below it, chiseled letters tell small truths. The league boundary, the name of the road, a distance number to the next fountain. You add a new icon to your legend, a little square pillar with a dot for an eye, and call it Herm marker. Beside it, a tiny footprint with 3 short lines behind it becomes paces, because distance, too, deserves a column that behaves. The dog performs an immediate inspection, 1 sniff, 2 polite snorts, tail set to civic approval. You open a small lane on your slate labelled Road and Dues, because where there are milestones, there tend to be obligations, repairs owed by a dime, tiny tolls at bridges, festival exemptions that show up like sunny loopholes. Under it, You carve a pair of icons, a miniature bridge for crossing coins, a leaf mask for festival dues waived. Joke number 1. Congratulations. Your ledger now tracks the ancient equivalent of free weekend parking. Mainstream historical fact settles in with a chisel's ring. In classical Athens, Hermes' square pillars topped with Hermes' head stood at boundaries, crossroads, and doorways. They bore inscriptions and sometimes distance marks, and travellers anointed them with oil or garlanded them for luck. You can still feel the habit on this lane. A smear of last week's olive, a thread of dry myrtle, the way people step a little straighter as they pass, as if audited by stone. You dot your seen eye beside the new pillar icon. Witnessed, logged, appreciated. Hermes has you count the road as if it were livestock. Milestones are herds of certainty, he says. He measures off 100 of your strides. 1, 2, 3. Then tightens his mouth and swaps to a measured pace that lands heel to toe like a metronome carved from patience. He nods at the pillar inscription. So many stadia to the next spring. So many to the hill shrine. You scratch a clean row under road and dues. Herm mark, number, water sign. A paw print because the dog has declared the fountain worthy in advance. The herd, curiously receptive to civic infrastructure, waits while you draw a tiny amphora beside the water sign as a refill expected reminder. Quirky Tidbit leans out from the pillar with a grin. Locals will sometimes hang little figs or plums on a herm during harvest as an offering for smooth feet. Then later swear that travellers, not gods, ate them. You pencil a fig icon in the margin labelled courtesy offerings, perishable, because your legend has decided to be hospitable. A boy running errands skids past, touches the pillar twice for luck, and keeps going without looking at the gods. The pillar likes that. Historians still argue whether rural attic distances were consistently standardized on all lanes, or whether Demes kept local measures that only loosely matched the cities. You say, letting the hedge settle on your tongue like time. Hermes solves it the way he always does. Both. And. He ties a knotted thong around your wrist every 10 paces. 1 knot, then has you compare it to the pillar's number. Your knots make agreeable noises against the official mark, agreeing to disagree by less than a sandal width. You add a droplet over 3 lines here. 2. Rain factor, because mud lengthens steps. Distance, like price, drifts when weather edits the page. He teaches you new road icons. A tiny wheel for cart wear allow delay. A feather for wind behind, count, generous. A little lyre, of course, for pilgrim traffic expect kindness and song. Your board starts to hold a second world parallel to the pastures, numbers that belong to lanes, not backs and bells. It's soothing in the same way a neat toolkit soothes, which is to say, you have fewer excuses to lose a thing when the drawer has labelled hollows. Mainstream fact, civic version. Athenians set up herms at street corners and gateways as protective and directional markers. Their sudden mutilation in 415 BCE, on the eve of the Sicilian expedition, caused panic and public investigations because boundary stones were not just rock, they were social certainty, made visible. You don't mention the panic out loud. You just stroke the pillar's cool flank with your fingertips and feel how a city leans on markers the way your numbers lean on columns. You draw a tiny crack icon in the legend, labelled Marker Disturbed Recount Route, because systems should know how to limp gracefully. The lane rises, bends, descends. At a creek spanned by a plank, a modest stone announces a telonion, a place where someone with a bored face and a stylus asks for a coin to keep wood over water. Hermes drops a sliver of silver with the resigned finesse of a man who would invent both commerce and loopholes. You scratch a bridge icon, circle an owl, add a mask because the village festival this week halves the toll, and then a new trick, draw a small split tally stick right on the margin to show that you took a receipt. You'll split a real twig later. For now, the symbol holds the place like a wedge in a book. Joke number 2. You have literally invented the doodle that means, I'll bring the paperwork. The dog lounges mid-plank as if performing an inspection for bounce. He allows passage. You add a paw. Breeze lifts bell voices behind you. The herd trickles across with a rhythm that sounds weirdly like your abax tune. 5, 5, 5. Lift, except now each lift is a clop on wood. You grin and don't tell anyone that math and music just shook hands again in a bridge. Historians still argue whether early milestones in Greek territories borrowed Persian road logic, measured stages on the royal road, or whether similar needs birthed similar stones by coincidence. You say, because the horizon keeps offering cousins. Hermes shrugs toward Anatolia, and then toward your pillar. Problems invent twins in different towns. You scribble a tiny winged sandal next to Stagehouse Rumoured, which is ledger code for there might be soup at the next bend. Numbers come alive on the lane. You add a column called boundary numbers, entries that aren't cows but matter to cows. Distance to a salt marsh affects price. To pasture commons affects crowding. To a market square affects rumours. You draw little tide marks for the marsh, a sheaf for commons, a small owl head for the square. Beneath each, a numeral and a mood. Up arrow for uphill, down for easy, wavy for likely muddy, dots for shaded bells carry farther. The board now holds landscape as if it were a herd with different coats. Quirky tidbit, road edition. Messengers sometimes scratch tiny directional arrows and shorthand notes on the base of Hermes. Left turn for cleaner ford. Beware geese, good figs behind wall, semi-official graffiti policed by nobody except weather. You find a faint arrow on this pillar's backside. Point it out. Hermes smiles like a man reading the margin notes of a predecessor he respects. You add a micro arrow to your slate with a little leaf. Local advice. Figs, edible, purely scholarly. Joke number 3 strolls up. You briefly consider adding influencer discount to your toll icon, because your dog's face just earned you a penny's mercy. You do not add it. You do scratch a tiny heart beside the bridge to denote operator smiled, which is how you intend to remember generosity when math forgets. By the time the sun commits to the idea of evening, you've stitched pasture math to road math in a seam you trust. The road and dues lane carries Herm icons, paces, bridges, and festival masks. The boundary numbers list holds distances and their consequences. Your old friends' crescents, X's, arrows, spirals still sit where cattle live, anchored by bells and earmarks. The split tally rides your belt. The cord knots tap your wrist. The bark notches at the grove keep a parallel truth the sky cannot erase. At the last bend, another Herm watches a milestone stone that says, in neat letters, how many stadia to port and to hills. You draw a horizon line across the bottom of your board, slower than usual, letting the scratch lengthen like a breath that forgets to end. Above it, you add one more legend symbol, a tiny house with smoke. Next to it you write, soft as the reed sighs, home range. The herd hears something in your posture and answers in vowels that mean close. You pause, palm against the pillar's cool certainty. Columns, knots, notches, pebbles, bells, dies, earmarks, Herms, milestones, boundary numbers. The afternoon that began as a soggy rumour now carries addresses. If something is missing, you will know where to look between two stones that both tell the same truth. If someone asks, you can say, births here, trades there, bridge coin dropped, festival waved, 10 paces shy because the mud stole a foot. Your board can walk to market and not get lost. You step on, gently, counting without counting, like breathing without thinking. The road and the pasture share a grammar now. The cow and the milestone both answer when you call their number. The dog, promoted to deputy of distances, trots ahead and claims the next shade. You dot the seen eye, almost tenderly. The lane glows a little with approval. You angle away from the lane toward low buildings with thick walls the colour of toasted barley, where roof beams turn rain into orderly strings. Grain breathes in here slow, warm. A polite ocean of kernels and voices go softer without being told. Hermes steps aside and lets you meet the next keepers of number. A scribe with ink on 2 fingers and a herdsman with straw in his hair, both standing in the doorway like bookends of the same thought. Your slate looks almost rustic beside their kit. Wax tablets nested like little doors, a reed pen trimmed to a decisive point, a cord with seals shaped like tiny moons. The dog sniffs the threshold, grants admission, then lies down as if temple floors were made for him. Pasture grammar, Hermes says, tapping your legend. Meet storeroom grammar. The scribe inclines his head toward your crescent. Birth softened X, loss. Opposed arrows, trade. An open spiral, stray. Then flips his tablet and draws cousins. A little sheaf for barley delivered, a circle with dot for oil jars sealed, a square with slash for bin opened, and 2 small footprints for carried to altar. The marks are not your marks, and they are exactly your marks. Your breath loosens its buckle. Joke number 1. You have found the indoor dialect of moo. Mainstream historical fact arrives like a careful clerk. Temples kept inventories engraved on stone lists of votive offerings, weights of silver, numbers of jars and named treasurers who were responsible line by chiseled line. In Athens, Such lists sprouted on Stoas, where anyone who could read, and many who could listen, could audit the god's pantry. The scribe points to a wall slab, rubbed smooth by fingers. You don't read it aloud, but your columns know what they're looking at. Headings, totals, witnesses, the city's calm voice speaking in stone. The herdsman tilts his chin toward your slate. Animals for first fruits, he says, meaning the mild, yearly arithmetic, by which calves and grain turn into procession and smoke. You add a tiny temple roof icon to your legend, and tuck a microcrescent under it to mean offered. The dog huffs. You reassure him. Not him, never him. He forgives you by sighing like a bellows. The scribe shows you bin numbers. He drags a stylus through wax with a small repeated grace, 4 slants and a cross for 5, then a second bundle, then a neat total in the corner that he reads back under his breath. You mirror him on slate. Amphora icons for oil, sheaves for grain, a small owl circled when silver accompanies the jars, a weight-inspected square when the balance hums true. He takes your split tally stick, turns it in the light, and smiles at the salt-grain secret tooth. In return, he ties a seal onto your cord, a lump pressed with a stamp that leaves a dancing figure. Bin 3, he says. And today. And the clay says it again when you tap it. Quirky Tidbit strolls in wearing a wreath of flour. Some bakers stamped loaves before baking. Symbols impressed in dough to mark price, weight, or temple ownership, so that a round of bread could pass through a market, like a message that fed you. The scribe lifts a flatbread from a basket near the door. The stamp shows a tiny theta and a grain ear. You add a microscopic loaf next to your valuation notes and call it pre-counted kindness. Historians still argue whether the habits of Mycenaean palace record keepers, the Linear B tablet people, left a living thread to classical clerks, or whether later city systems restarted from new cloth. You say, because the room itself feels old in a different way, and the debate wants a perch. The scribe has the look of a man who would cheerfully inscribe either answer if the council voted at noon. He scratches your seen eye in the corner of his wax with a fondness that makes you unreasonably happy. He leads you through smell and shadow to a granary door. Rope crosses it, knotted twice. The knot sits under a seal impressed with a tiny bull. He breaks and reties with the economy of a person who ties truth to wood for a living. Inside, barley rests in bins like many small suns piled together. He runs a rod into the grain and lifts measure by depth, not by wish. Hermes taps the rod with 2 fingers. Depth remembers. You copy the idea to your board as a short vertical bar beside the sheaf. Soundings taken, and dot the seen eye because counting, once again, becomes a shape you can hold. Mainstream fact brushes your sleeve. Amphorae travelled with marks, potter's stamps, capacity signs, and later, cities minted their pride onto clay and coin, so commerce could recognize origin at a glance. You don't get tangled in chronology. You just etch a plain amphora with a small notch to mean checked against mark, and promise your future self to sleep better knowing jars agree with their mouths. The herdsman beckons you into a side pen where temple cattle wait under beams that smell like sun. You use your pasture toolkit bells, ear notches, your red and saffron dots with a new flourish. A little temple roof beside each animal's line on the slate so their bodies don't get lost in grain math. Your open spirals are all closed today. You draw one anyway and cross it softly to mean procession done, returned. Joke number 2. You resist drawing laurel on the dog, who now guards a pile of rope like it insulted his ancestors. A priest with robe hitched for stairs arrives, trailing incense. He doesn't ask for your board, but looks at it the way a singer glances at a tuned instrument, half respect, half relief. The goddess likes tidy, he says, and the scribe's mouth twitches in a way you recognize from everyone who has ever balanced a column at dusk. You add a tiny spiral with a star above it to mean festival drift. Inventory that swells and shrinks with offerings, and feel better immediately for admitting that even sacred math breathes. Historians still argue whether precinct accounts were fundamentally spiritual ritual first, arithmetic second, or whether the arithmetic itself was a kind of ritual. You murmur, liking the taste of the paradox. The priest answers by gesturing you toward a table where the day's offerings are weighed, noted, and blessed in a choreography that looks suspiciously like your Shorabaks. Pebbles in bowls, marks on wax, a chant at 5 that lifts every voice. Your tune again, 5, 5, 5. Lift only now, the lift sounds like incense rising. You run a reconciliation lap between worlds. Pasture. Opening 48. Births 3. Loss 1. Trades even. Strays closed. Bodies in grass 49. Temple pen. Offerings 2 calves, crescents under the roof. Returned 1, retained 1 for feast. Granary. Bin 3 depth recorded. 2 amphorae oil sealed, owl circled. 1 amphora carried to altar. 2 footprints drawn for movement. Road and dues. Bridge coin paid. Festival mask halved toll. Hermes anointed, dog supervised. Everything aligns like doors on their hinges. You let yourself draw a second faint string in the reconciliation lyre box, because the music found this room too. Quirky tidbit returns in a whisper. Certain treasurers refuse to count on days of thunder, insisting the numbers jumped when Zeus talked. You add a tiny thunderbolt with a no sign through it to your legend and label it Superstition Tolerated, Math Postponed, because your systems can afford a holiday when the sky holds a meeting. Joke number 3. You imagine launching a line of fashionable seals, tiny dogs, tiny owls, tiny lyres with proceeds funding better bridge planks. You refrain, barely, from pitching Hermes on Hermes approved, because you like having lightning only as a rumour. The scribe takes your split tally half, presses his stamp into a chip of clay, and ties it to the stick with a loop. Cross-ledger witness, he says, which is a phrase you would marry if it asked. He scrawls the day's initials onto his wax, then closes the tablet like a small, contented door. You answer by nicking a tiny mark on your tally for temple checked, and the wood, as ever, says click, which is its way of nodding. Mainstream fact. One last sturdy stitch notes that agoranamoi and temple treasurers sometimes posted names of guarantors beside accounts, living signatures beside numbers. You draw 3 tiny dots in a row, dog scribe you, and let that be your guarantor line. Hermes, with theatrical reluctance, adds his dot slightly off to the side, which is exactly on brand. Rain, or the memory of it, cools the threshold. You shoulder your slate, feel the cord knot rest where it should, smell the warm, flowery breath of bins that are not nervous because people are watching. The priest nods you out. The scribe, shy and proud at once, taps the corner of your board where the senile lives. Numbers that began in mud now sit in wax and stone. Bells that taught your ear now tune a room. If you needed to find a missing jar, you could walk straight to it between 2 marks that know each other's names. Outside, the herd answers the slow drum of your steps with vowels you've learned to read. The dog shakes flour dust from his coat and returns to his core competence, which is making the world look audited just by being in it. The roofs catch late light and turn it into quiet. You make one last mark, a tiny roof over a crescent in your margin, to mean home-taught temple its lullaby. The symbol smiles without moving. You leave the temple smell of grain and lamp smoke for air that tastes like iron and salt, following Hermes down to a little quay where hulls breathe against stone, and gulls hold union meetings on every post. Ropes creak like old knees. Nets glisten like damp arithmetic. Roads carry numbers, he says, but water makes them fluent. He flips your slate strap across your chest so it rides high and dry, then taps the legend with a sea-familiar knuckle. Let the board speak a dialect sailors respect. On deck, the world rearranges itself into planks and triangles. Hermes palms a coil of line and lays it in tidy loops. Left, middle, right. Your old pasture trick, now a rope diagram. Cargo is a herd that refuses bells, he says, so you promote your amphora icon from margin decoration to full citizen. 1 amphora, 1 scratch. 5. A cross. 10. A neat row with a header. He adds a wave mark beside the valuation notes because swell can change price quicker than rumour, and today the swell is a shrug. The dog plants himself by the gangway and becomes head of customs with no paperwork whatsoever. Joke number 1. His inspection method is to accept scratches behind the ear as documentation. Sailors ferry your kit into their grammar. Pebbles become chips of broken potostraka because pottery shatters into infinity at harbours. And you slide the red and buff shards along a chalked plank abacus with the same 5 and lift rhythm the river taught you. The split tally stick becomes a ribboned tag tied through the amphora's ear. You notch the tag and split a second thin shim, 1/2 for you, 1 for the warehouse clerk up coast. When the amphora reaches a foreign dock, the halves either kiss like old friends or refuse like 2 people who remember different parties. Proof survives weather by being small and stubborn. Mainstream historical fact steps aboard with a coil over its shoulder. Phoenician traders, tireless as tide, carried not only timber, glass, and purple dye throughout the Mediterranean, but also the alphabetic habit, efficient marks for sounds that turned cargo lists from prayers into checkable prose. You don't make a speech, You just let a sailor's hand show you a painted letter on an amphora handle, and watch how it spots origin faster than a nose. This from Tyre, that from Rhodes, another stamped with a little rose or a Rhodian magistrate's name, as if the jar itself had sworn an oath. Your amphora icon gets a microstamp beside it, handle mark checked, and your chest unknots like a good rope. Hermes draws a column titled Ports, then sketches 3 tiny badges, a cedar twig for Tyre and Sidon, a horse head for Etruscan markets, because their coins love a good horse, and a squat wolf for a certain up-and-coming river city whose numerals will later insist on being carved onto everything. He taps each badge when cargo passes its care. You add a little owl for Attic silver, and an alpha to say which weight the coin swears by. The board starts to look like a passport that knows math. Quirky Tidbit comes laughing over the gunwale. Some dock clerks, so the story goes, used cuttlefish bone as an eraser on chalked boards, soft, salty, brilliant at polishing errors out of sight, so bring the bone became slang for, we're redoing the ledger before the captain sees it. You run a fingertip over a smoothed plank and feel the faint, velvety truth of revision. You promise your future self to use it for kindness, not mischief, which is a promise you intend to keep at least until lunch. Historians still argue whether the Greek abax taught the Roman hand abacus its groove logic, or whether both grew from older Near Eastern boards like cousins who learned counting at different kitchens. You say, because a merchant with wind-burned eyes has just produced a bronze frame with sliding beads that clicks like rain disciplined into rails. Hermes admires it the way a carpenter admires a rival's square, no jealousy, just appetite, and sets your pebbles to echo the same totals, so land and sea agree without yelling. The ship's officer calls roll-on jars, oil from Aulis, wine from Chios, salted fish from Massalia with lids sealed by resin that smells like a pine forest holding its breath. You build a 2-column dance, left plank for loaded, right plank for ledgered. When they disagree, you don't look for blame. You look for a jar that rolled behind a coil or a mark smudged by spray. A boy swears he counted 12 when you have 11. You hand him your split shim and ask it to speak. It refuses to kiss a non-existent twin. He grins, counts again, salutes the stick. The system doesn't scold. It nudges. A Phoenician clerk shows you his wax tablet, the same cosy door you saw in the granary, only salted, and inscribes a tiny ship beside each line, when cargo has a destination contract rather than a sell wherever their thirsty fate. You add the ship icon to your legend, feel faintly piratical, and decide piracy is only allowed for charm. Joke number 2. You draft a policy, no arithmetic, after 3 cups of island wine, and the sailors ratify it by acclamation. Mainstream Fact offers another stitch. Amphora handles from Rhodes and Cnidos often bear stamped dates and officiants' names. Such stamps let merchants and archaeologists track trade like a breadcrumb trail of clay. You glance at a Rhodian rose impressed on a handle and mirror it with a dot on your slate. Not because you plan to publish, but because future you likes to remember which rose you smelled, even in accountancy. Hermes reassigns your rain factor droplet to a sea state curl, then adds a tiny gust mark for wind behind, add time to joy, subtract from spoilage. Prices on your today's drift board tilt with tide. Salt slumps a little near the port. Oil perks up because a storm bruised an olive stand inland. Labour doubles when a trireme's oarsmen swagger ashore with wages and appetites. You mark a tragedy mask by labour because a festival in sightline will tug men off docks by the ear. The board keeps its temper while money changes moods. Historians still argue whether Etruscan numerals nudged Rome's accounting habits, or whether Roman stubbornness invented its own idiom from scratch. You add, watching an Etruscan merchant tally on a notched board with the casual grace of someone who could count a herd by smell. He uses V marks and X marks that look like cousins of yours who moved to the city and took an office job. He gives your dog a fig. The dog updates his opinion of Etruria to excellent. Quirky Tidbit returns with wet feet. Sailors sometimes licked amphora rims to verify resin quality. Good resin seals flavour. Bad resin tastes like the floor of time. You watch a man do it with theatrical flourish. The crew boo and cheer appropriately, and you pencil a microscopic tongue icon next to one amphora line because your legend isn't proud. The jar passes the test. The man survives the joke. You run an export rehearsal. From your pasture town to this deck, 2 calves promised, temple roof over crescent. 1 heifer traded in, arrow right with circle. Salt paid at the creek bridge circled owl, festival mask halved. Grain depth recorded at bin 3 vertical bar. And now 12 amphorae of oil outbound, stamped, sealed, weight checked, square, and split shimmed for the far clerk. You recite it to the boatswain, who repeats the numbers back while his hand slides beads with a speed that would make a raven cuss. Both systems land on 12. You draw the tiniest lyre string in the reconciliation box because the sea just sang yes without touching a tortoise. Joke number 3. Ambles in on a gull. You briefly consider teaching the birds to deliver receipts. Then remember their stance on paperwork is, eat it. You add a tiny beak with X icon to the legend, avian risk, and feel oddly professional. A Romanish factor with a chalky hem eyes your slate. He points to your ox skull benchmark and nods. Value travels better as animals than as adjectives. He scratches I and V beside a tally to convert your bundles of 5 into his comfort language. Upright strokes staged like men on duty, and the translation pleases both of you more than it has any right to. Historians still argue whether merchants truly code-switched numerals on the fly. You murmur. And then you watch it happen like weather. The sun leans west. Rigging writes music in the air. You copy final counts to the margin, add a paw for Doc Dog approved, different dog, same union, and chalk a tiny Herm pillar where the key meets the street boundary between salt and dust, both now accounted. The crew casts off. You step back to stone with your slate tucked like a heartbeat. The board is heavier with stamps and lighter with worry. Hermes looks at you the way mentors look when the student stops asking if the tool will work and starts using it to cook dinner. Your columns, born in rain over hooves, now stand steady on wet planks, across alphabets, under different suns. The amphorae bob out, each tagged with a mark that means someone somewhere will know what belongs where. Your split shim rides your belt like a quiet promise that will click into place on a foreign dock, far away and exactly right. You dot the seen I for the sea, then draw a line as long and slow as wake. Above it, your symbols owl, amphora, ship, skull, wave, glow, and go still. Behind you, the temple's breath continues its warm counting. Ahead, the road's Herm waits with its calm face and measured patience. Between them, the harbour says what your ledger says. Departures are only half the number. Arrivals will make the rest. You walk the long curve back from quay to pasture, past the Herm with its clean supervisory face, past the bridge that remembered each hoof with a plank's small pride, past the plane tree where the rain first asked you to choose columns over panic. Evening tidies the edges. Shadows lengthen into obedience. The herd has become a paragraph again, subject, verb, object. With only one calf trying to be an exclamation point, you settle the slate on a route like a low table and breathe once through the lines you've drawn a dozen times today. Final, Hermes says, not like a judge, more like a baker tapping the loaf to hear the doneness. You check what breath remembers before fingers do. Opening 48. Births 3 crescents with nursing dots and berry crowns to match. Losses 1 softened X. Wavy for river, paw for search, grace note for kindness. Trades opposed arrows, 1 feathered out, 1 plain in. Owl circled for coin, amphora dotted for harvest IOU. Ox skull half for value benchmark, weight inspected square checked. Strays 2 spirals once open, now both crossed with little ear and bell icons. Today's drift, river kind to freight, grain nicked by hail nearby, labour tugged by festival masks. Road and dues, bridge coin paid, festival half toll, Herms oiled by the passing kind, boundary numbers, spring ahead, 2 stadia, market 4, marsh 3, downriver, tide marks sketched, ports, 12 amphorae outbound, stamped, sealed, split shimmed, temple, calves counted under the roof, 1 retained for feast, 1 returned, bin 3 sounded, seal pressed, cross ledger witness tied. Your cord knot thumps at the back of your wrist exactly where relief expects it. The bark notches hold like low music you can't quite hear until you lean your head on the trunk. The dog performs his last rounds audit, walk of dignity, touching nose to bellwether, to saffron tail, to your tally half at your belt, as if scent can sign a name. You add a paw in the margin, not because the ledger needs it, but because the day does. Joke number 1. His signature is a quiet stamp in the shape of sniff, which is, frankly, better penmanship than most city clerks. Mainstream historical fact pads in without fanfare. Athenians carved the annual tribute lists, the quota lists, on stone names of cities, amounts paid to the Delian League, entered year by year public arithmetic so visible that even the wind could read it. You look at your small rain-oiled board and feel its kinship with those calm stelae. Debits and offerings, dues, and returns, all standing where argument must become clarity. You scratch a tiny stone icon near your totals and label it. In your head, the world was told. Hermes gestures to your reconciliation lyre box. You draw the faintest final string one. Simple, level, no crescendo. Just the tone that remains when everyone stops trying to speak first. Apollo is already down the lane behind the hedges, trailing daylight like a ribbon left on a chair. You can still hear in your wrist the way his tune braided your abax count into song. You underline the last string with a line so thin it almost isn't there. Enough. Quirky tidbit arrives late, yawning but delightful. Some old herds in Attica swore that milk weighed heavier on nights with a fat moon, so a few meticulous minds avoided settling accounts at full moon. The jug lies when the goddess smiles. You smile, write a microscopic moon beside valuation notes, and add a note to self. Superstition tolerated, math postponed again. Hermes pretends not to notice the moon icon, and absolutely notices. Historians still argue whether Hermes began as rustic fertility posts later pressed into boundary service, or whether they were boundary mines from the first with fertility, simply part of a god who liked travel, honest, and houses blessed. You murmur, letting the phrase, still argue, set like a pebble on water. The pillar down the lane does not answer, it supervises. Hermes answers the way he always does. Both. And, as long as travellers pass more safely for it. You circle the herd one last time with the left, middle, right streams you learned in the rain. 15, 16, 18, a split when one exceeds 20, a merge when two behave. You hum 5, 5, 5, lift, and the bells answer like a choir that knows the page without looking. The red dot calf nurses. You draw a tiny crumb bread ode because the herdsman promised. The saffron tail stays away from the willow, chastened or merely distracted. You add a dot for improved judgment, temporary. Joke number 2. You consider issuing performance reviews. Exceeded expectations, bellwether, needs development, willow enthusiast. And decide to table the HR revolution until you've invented coffee breaks. At the plane tree, you press your half of the split tally against Hermes's half one more time. Click. The berry witness seam is a faint memory now, but the teeth still know each other. The salt grain missing tooth is there like a secret handshake between pieces of wood. You lay the joined stick across the lyre box as if a bridge could be made of promises. Then you separate it and slide your half home, the way a story closes without forgetting its hinge. You sketch small aftercare at the bottom margin. Oil the strap. Dry the slate at the hearth. Re-dye bells if rain returns. Check ear notches tomorrow for brambles. Refresh the legend ink, where the river ghosted a line. This is housekeeping, but also tenderness. Columns are polite. Care is loud in a whisper. Hermes taps the final totals with the stylus. He doesn't correct anything. He doesn't need to. He only draws a single seen eye at the top of the board, dots it with a careful touch, and then, in a flourish so small it barely qualifies as flourish, adds a second eye beside it, one for your seeing, one for the world's. Joke number 3. If spreadsheets could wink, yours just did, and somehow remained professional. The road breathes, the marsh tastes of iron, the river, demoted from spreadsheet to lullaby, hums without counting for the first time today. You run your palm across the slate and feel the glyphs like shallow fingerprints. Births, losses, swaps, spirals now closed, Hermes and bridges and owls, amphorae and ships, temple roofs and grain soundings, bells, dies, earmarks, sanderbacks and bark notches, split tallies and rumour sandals, the dog's immaculate audit. Every tool has met all the others, shaken hands, and agreed to sleep. You draw the long horizon line across the board's bottom, the slowest one you've drawn all afternoon. Above it, the town of Marks glows like windowed houses at dusk. Below it, nothing needs writing. Hermes slides the strap over your shoulder, and it fits like a thought finishing itself. He points his chin toward the lane that heads home by a lazy, correct route. The dog takes point. The herd follows the bell that learned to be a bellwether, which is to say, the future is tired and happy. You breathe, and the count in your chest reconciles with the count in your hands. You could lose the slate now and still carry the order. You could keep the slate forever and still sleep without it. You let the world be tallied, and then let it be only itself. Let the board grow lighter in your hands as the evening cools the edges of the day. Imagine the slate setting itself down beside the hearth, a soft clack like a lid on a jar of calm. Symbols dim to embers, crescents for the calves, softened X for the river's one hard sentence. Opposed arrows resting their points, spirals closed and quiet. The seen eyes blink once and drift half shut, holding their witness without asking for any more. Your breath lengthens into lanes the way a river lengthens into sleep. In, you gather the soft bells and the grass-sweet air. Out, you lay them in their columns and watch totals settle where they belong. In, you feel the chord's light tap against your wrist like a slow metronome. Out, you untie it and let the knots become simple string. In, the plane tree's bark remembers the day's fine notches. Out, the grain lifts back towards smoothness, patient as rain forgetting itself. Somewhere beyond the window, a cart murmurs across a plank bridge and keeps going. Somewhere behind the house, a dog circles once, twice, and becomes a warm punctuation mark beside a door. The road Hermes stands its night watch without asking for torches. The river hums a level note that requires nothing from you. Columns soften into lines, lines into breath, breath into the broad, kind margin where you rest. If a number rises in your mind, let it dissolve like a pebble pressed back into sand. If a worry tries to open a spiral, close it with a bell's gentle syllable and a small, certain dot. You have seen what needed seeing. You have marked what needed marking. Hands empty, shoulders unshouldered. You can set the ledger down inside your chest and feel it become the simple weight of sleep. Good. Softer now. Slower. The string in the reconciliation box draws itself to silence. The horizon holds, and the night, satisfied with your careful counts, counts you among its blessings.